Today, I explored the entire map of Red Dead Redemption 2 and explored every single location Rockstar put into the game. So I started my journey out in McFarland Ranch. I wanted to do this because it kind of represents John's journey itself. He also starts in McFarland Ranch, and I think McFarland Ranch also does a good job of kind of showing how Rockstar designed the world of Red Dead Redemption 1. McFarland Ranch is a good example of like a starter town in a game where a lot of towns, they have this tutorial section where you're kind of forced into it, and that's what McFarland Ranch is in Red Dead Redemption 1. And the interesting thing about McFarland Ranch itself is it isn't really a town. It's kind of a ranch that has expanded to have some of the functions of a town. And I think this does a good job of like illustrating how the game is supposed to go, because there are bigger towns than McFarland Ranch. There are more interesting things than McFarland Ranch, and they kind of want you to start in this spot that's like, yeah, it's somewhat interesting, but it's not the most interesting part of the game, where you're kind of like already served the buffet at the beginning. You're kind of served a little appetizer at the beginning, and then the game continues to level up from there. And especially because the biggest town, Blackwater, is one that you're going to be spending time in at the very end of the game mainly. So it's just a really interesting thing of how they design their game. And McFarland Ranch itself is like kind of a cool place to go visit. I mean, it's not really that interesting. There are some things to do, like you can go throw horseshoes over here, and there are like a couple target practice things, but it really is this kind of starter town that you're just kind of given a little appetizer to at the beginning of the game, because again, they don't really want to have too many things in the very first town, because then you don't want to go any of the other places, and you always want to come back to that initial town. Then you also have this area here where they have the horses. I mean, it is a real ranch. That's the one thing about McFarland Ranch. Like, the thing is, it's more of a ranch than an actual town. Like, it's a ranch that kind of expanded and turned into a town where people are living. And, you know, I don't know if there are any actual people that can like live there without working on the ranch itself. It probably is a thing where the housing is only for employees of the ranch, which does make a lot of sense, because the ranch itself is the reason that there is like a little town here. And it just kind of is around the horses, the cows, and all that. I mean, it's a ranch. It's just going to have all the things that a normal ranch would have. Like, you have all the horses for all the people that need to use the horses to herd around the cows, herd around the cattle. And then you also have the train right here. I do think the train is one of the more important things in McFarland Ranch. This is a reason why McFarland Ranch is a kind of like town by this point. And this is also one of the crazy things that happened. This horse gets absolutely demolished by the train. I don't even understand how that happened. I don't understand whose horse that was, because it was randomly galloping over there and it didn't seem like it was connected to anyone. But then you have the train station here as well. The train station seems like it's a pretty valuable thing as well. Like, I don't know. It just seems like that's the thing that has kind of kept McFarland Ranch doing well during this time period. Also, another town that we're going to be visiting later, Tumbleweed, kind of gets destroyed because it doesn't have any actual connection to the railroad. So I do think the connection to the railroad will make McFarland Ranch something in the future. Maybe if you came back to Red Dead Redemption in 20 years, McFarland Ranch probably could be a much bigger town and probably is going to move out of being a ranch, just like how Los Angeles kind of was like a ranch way back in the day, and it became like a real city based off of this ranch and like farm things that you can do. The other thing that's pretty cool about McFarland Ranch is that it actually seems like the people are working there. Like, you can go around and people are actually doing their jobs. There are cows that seemingly need to be milked. Like, there's a milk bucket under one of those cows. So it seems like it's a real ranch that operates like a real ranch. I know Rockstar has a lot of commitment to realism throughout their games, and I think Red Dead Redemption 1 is surprisingly realistic for a game that's made in 2011. Even going in the barn, it just does kind of seem like a barn that would be used in an actual farm. I mean, there aren't any animals in here, which I do think there probably should be some animals in here. I don't know. I don't really go in barns that often, but I feel like there should be some animals here, but there are some animals outside, and it just seems like McFarland Ranch has a lot of investment into the actual community itself, because it does seem to be a pretty popular place for a ranch. There is one singular place in town that I think is probably not controlled by the McFarlands, and that is a little sheriff's office here. I don't know if they have an actual sheriff working for them, or if it's just a sheriff's office where it's like if they have any criminals. And because John can do actual jobs for McFarland Ranch here, like you can do some night watch jobs where you fend off the the criminals. I don't know if they're paying any actual sheriffs or if this is more of a jail for people that have misbehaved, because there is a dude in here, and this dude was calling out to John Marston. He was like, John, I know who you are. I got all these things for you. And, John is obviously not letting him in, but it doesn't seem like there's anyone actually working here. So I would assume that this is more of a place to just hold any criminals that they get, that they kind of like community volunteer and get out of their communities. But I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting thing to check out, because it seems like the one thing that feels like a real town instead of just something that's kind of controlled by the McFarland. Heading just southwest of McFarland Ranch, you can find Worthington Ranch, and this is one of the few places in game that is only in Red Dead Redemption 1 and not in Red Dead Redemption 2. And especially like a building like this, like it does make sense that this could have been built in the years in between Red Dead Redemption 1 and Red Dead Redemption 2, but I just don't know if like all these things would have been built during this time period. Like this feels like it could have been built in 4 years during the epilogue in between that and the actual time period of Red Dead Redemption 1, because it just seems like a pretty new built house. Like all these things, like it doesn't really look like they've been there for that long. They're not all that weathered. They seem like new construction. So I totally understand why this wouldn't be in Red Dead Redemption 2, but it's kind of just a generic old ranch that you can find in the area, which makes sense because this area around McFarland Ranch seems really good for grazing animals, so I do understand why someone would want to live here. The next place I visited was this abandoned Native American camp called Mescalero. There is a couple of spots in like Red Dead Redemption 2 that are very similar to this, but this place, again, similar to the last place, was also not there in Red Dead Redemption 2, which at least this one doesn't really make any sense, because it's an abandoned Native American place like this. At least you'd probably either have Native Americans here, or potentially you could say that maybe the Native Americans came in after and were there for a short time before leaving it. I also helped this guy out, saved him from those wolves. But like, it doesn't really make a ton of sense to have an abandoned Native American place here that wasn't there in Red Dead Redemption 2. It's just kind of a weird thing that doesn't really make sense between the two games. But again, I do understand that Red Dead Redemption 2, they cut a lot of different content out of New Austin. I just do think this is a pretty cool place that you kind of can stumble upon in Red Dead Redemption 1, because it kind of reminds you of the Wapiti from Red Dead Redemption 2 and just how these people were treated so poorly in Red Dead Redemption 1 and Red Dead Redemption 2, and just in real life. The Native Americans were treated absolutely terribly, and they basically just got forced out of a lot of their land, and they were forced into places that they didn't really want to live in. And I don't think this is like a reservation. This just seems like something that used to be a camp and then potentially they're forced out of it. But I know the Western Native Americans, it took a lot longer for them to be forced out of their homelands in comparison to some of the Eastern ones. So maybe these people just got forced out of it before Red Dead Redemption 1, but there's not really any proof of what happened to the people that lived here. I then went into Pikes Basin, and Pikes Basin kind of reminds me of like the Grand Canyon in the actual game, because it's a place that has been clearly carved out by a river. As you can see, you kind of have the winding paths that remind you of a river, and visiting it, you can see that there's a gang right here that is operating in this area. And then if you go to the other side of the canyon, you can then get in talking to this guy who says that the gang in the camp is the Baller Gang, and they have actually stolen some of his family's herd, and now he wants to get them all back because they're all he got, and he just doesn't really have anything left if he doesn't have his herd. So you have to go and fight off these guys as John. There are a lot of these kind of encounters where you go to certain places in the game and then you just have to fight off a ton of people. It is a cool thing that kind of like adds a little bit to each of these locations. But the one thing that I really don't like about these kind of encounters that you have to do with a lot of them here is that they just continue to happen. You can't come back to any of these locations and just explore them normally. Like, I've gone to Fort Mercer a bunch of times, which we'll be going to later in this, and there are always these things where you have to go and fight these people whenever you want to go and explore them. And while it is cool, I just think, maybe you have one of these fights and then you can then go and just explore it normally instead of having multiple of these fights. And just in general, like, although these fights are relatively cool and relatively interesting, I just think it's like having so many of these ones around the map just makes it a little bit harder to explore these places normally, where it's like, oh, you have to get into a fight with these guys. Although it does add a lot to the world, and it does just make each of these locations a lot more unique. Like, imagine coming into this spot and you didn't know about any of these fights, and you're like, wow, like, I really have to save this guy's thing. And it just kind of gives a little bit of like a side mission in the game itself that isn't an actual side mission. Like, it's an unmarked mission in the game. And I think that's what like Red Dead Redemption, the series, really thrives on. Something that I've learned while playing both Red Dead Redemption 1 and Red Dead Redemption 2 and comparing them to a lot of Rockstar's other games, like especially GTA 5, which is like in between Red Dead Redemption 1 and Red Dead Redemption 2, is the Red Dead Redemption games are just so much further built in the actual world itself. Like, GTA 5 obviously has a pretty cool and built out world, but because it's so like technologically advanced, it doesn't really feel as interesting of a world. Where you go to Red Dead Redemption 1 or Red Dead Redemption 2 and you have to go around on a horse, which just slows everything down, and it makes it a lot more likely to see some of these random encounters and see some of these like unique world events where you have to go and fight against people just to, you know, make it feel a little bit more realistic in the actual world itself. So I just think these locations and these types of things just make the game so much more realistic, and it really makes it feel like a real world that you're living in instead of just a place that you're like a video game character in. So I think it really adds to the world. I hope that these things are added to GTA 6, just because I think GTA 5 didn't really have a ton of these like random encounters and things you can kind of like explore on in the world. So I think it'd be really cool to see GTA 6 have a lot more of like these type of things where it just kind of fleshes out the world instead of being like something that is like marked on the map. It's just kind of like a cool thing that you can find and explore on your own. After clearing out all the gang members, you then get a cutscene with the guy who says you have to clear the way out, and then he'll just follow you with the herd out of the area, which I do think is pretty cool, having also like a two-step mission here where first you have to fight your way into the canyon and then you have to fight your way out of the canyon. Just really does a good job of using the geography of the actual game itself, like being a canyon and being something that's carved by rivers where you kind of have to fight your way into it, and then once you're in, you also have to fight your way out of it because there's still like a canyon and there are still ways to get out of the canyon itself. Just makes it a much more interesting mission. And I do think overall this mission is a pretty cool one. Pikes Basin is also just a pretty cool place to visit. This is also one of the few places that there's also like a Red Dead Redemption 2 mission in the New Austin area. I think it's the only place in New Austin where there's actually a mission in Red Dead Redemption 2. So it's kind of cool to have a place that is like also used in Red Dead Redemption 2 that you can visit in Red Dead Redemption 1, especially when there's no actual mission that takes place here really in Red Dead Redemption 1. Like, there are a couple of ones that are like kind of invested in this area, but there's nothing that like directly takes place in Red Dead Redemption 1 in this area. I then headed over to the edge of the bluff here where you can see all the way over to New Austin and Armadillo and just all the cool areas in New Austin. I then headed a little bit further down where you also have this camp here, but there's not really that much going on. And then eventually getting to this bottom area over here. This is normally where when you play Red Dead Redemption 2, you just immediately get attacked by Del Lobos here. And there actually was a random encounter where I see these two prisoners are escaping from this lawman here, and the lawman just tells them to shoot this guy because they hunted down they killed two of his boys here. But the thing is, this seems like it has to be like the Armadillo sheriff, and yet it's not the Armadillo sheriff that we actually know here. So I'm just kind of confused on who this sheriff is himself. Like, where is he going? He's not going to Tumbleweed because that's also not a place, and it's like we know the people in McFarland Ranch. I'm just kind of wondering who this sheriff could be and who is he a sheriff of, because how is he so close to Armadillo and not the one we know? After this, instead of going all the way into Armadillo, I instead went over to Coots Chapel. And Coots Chapel I also think is a lot more interesting in Red Dead Redemption 1 than is in Red Dead Redemption 2. Obviously, Red Dead Redemption 2, a lot of the stuff got cut, but even in Red Dead Redemption 1, there are all these different buildings outside of Coots Chapel that are just kind of interesting to me. Like, what were they used for? Like, was there a whole like kind of town around Coots Chapel? And why are there such like random buildings around it? Like, they're not all clumped together. They're all in like weird areas. You also have this one right here, which is the stranger mission in this area as well. So she's kind of posted up at one of these buildings, but it just seems kind of weird how far away each of the buildings are from each other and how they're so far away from the chapel itself. Like, what are those buildings doing and why are they like so far away from the chapel? Like, are they just things to kind of support the chapel itself, or are they just, I don't know, like people's houses? Like, it's just kind of weird to see all these abandoned buildings. And also, like, why did they get abandoned? Obviously, Coots Chapel is not really in the best state either, because there are holes in the roof of Coots Chapel, and while people are keeping it up to date at least somewhat, and like maybe people are praying in Coots Chapel, it doesn't really seem like Coots Chapel is in the best of circumstances. And then even going around Coots Chapel itself, it doesn't really seem to be the most up-to-date place. You also have the cemetery here, and the cemetery doesn't seem to be in good repair either. A lot of these things are kind of destroyed and kind of in bad circumstances, in bad condition. There are a bunch of people here, so I don't know if these are all workers or just people who are at the chapel or the cemetery to pray for their loved ones. And the thing about the loved ones here as well is there is one reference to the man with no name. That is Clint Eastwood from A Fistful of Dollars trilogy. It's the one with Sergio Leone. I don't know if that's what the trilogy is called, but it's like A Fistful of Dollars, Once Upon a Time in the West, I believe. There's a bunch of movies with Clint Eastwood and Sergio Leone, but there is a little reference to that, and that kind of has like, you know, inspired a lot of the stuff that happened in Red Dead Redemption 1. So I do think it is a really cool reference. And then inside the chapel itself, I do think this is a super cool place. While I do think that Coots Chapel doesn't really live up to any of the churches in Mexico. The churches in Mexico are so much cooler, and this one is also in much worse shape. This one still is a pretty cool place to visit. I just feel like it would have been a nice thing in Red Dead Redemption 2 to be able to go into any of the churches, because the churches are just such cool places to go visit in real life and in the game. And it is interesting to me that every single church in Red Dead Redemption 1 is all in really bad condition. It just seems weird that a place like New Austin, which seems to have more and more settlers come in as time is going on, just has so many things in bad shape. Like, why is the church here in such bad shape if more and more people are moving into this area as time goes on? And then while I was leaving the Coots Chapel area, I get one of the most common random encounters in the entirety of Red Dead Redemption 1. This probably happened 10 times while I was recording this video, and while I was exploring the entirety of the Red Dead Redemption 1 map. It just is the most common one. You go over, the person's like, oh, I need help, and then they steal your horse from you, and then you just have to shoot them. And it's like, bro, why are you stealing the horse from someone with a gun when you don't have a gun yourself? It just is a little weird. And then I went to this area. I think this place is called Green Hollow. It's an abandoned area in Red Dead Redemption 1. There's not that much going on with it. I know there are a couple of things that you can get there in Red Dead Redemption 2. There is a little bit of loot that you can get in Red Dead Redemption 1 there, so it is kind of cool, but I'm just kind of confused on what the point of this place is. Like, what is the actual use of this place? It's in a very beautiful area, so it's probably just someone's house, but why are there so many different abandoned buildings in this area in New Austin? I then continued along this area a little bit further to the west here, and this area is pretty cool. I mean, I really just like the areas right next to the river. I think Red Dead Redemption is one of the more underrated games in terms of graphics. Like, the fact that this is a game from 2011 and it still looks this good, like, it looks pretty comparable to a lot of the games that come out now, just because the actual art style is so condensed and so focused on a specific tone, like the tone of being a Western. I feel like it really does look as good as a lot of the games here. And you can also see all the way into Mexico, El Presidio, and a lot of the beautiful things that we'll be checking out in Mexico a little bit later. But eventually I came to this area called Brittle Brush Trawl, which is really mainly used in one mission where John tries to get all the way over to Mexico on a rope that they connect from this area all the way to the other side, and it doesn't work out in the end. In this area, it just isn't really used. Like, I don't really know what this is used for. I guess it's just a dock that, you know, maybe people can go out of, but there's not really that much going on, so it's not all that interesting. I then went over to the west side, over to Lake Don Julio. This is just a little bit south of Armadillo, and this is mainly used in the one mission where Jack comes here at the very, very end of Red Dead Redemption 1 to check out Edgar Ross, because he's supposedly in this area. And then I get this exact same thing here. Hey, I need help here. I'm stranded. And again, I try to shoot this guy before he can knock me off, but he still pulls me off. And this is just one of the most annoying things. Like, why does this happen so often? I'm just trying to be a nice person. I'm just trying to be a high honor John Marston, and this guy just sets himself up to die here. Like, did you really have to die here? Probably not, but you allowed yourself to because you tried to take John Marston, one of the most famous and honorable men in all of Red Dead Redemption 1, and you tried to take his horse. But this area, genuinely super beautiful. You can also see all the reflections in the water, which I also think is just a really cool thing that shows how amazing of a game Red Dead Redemption 1 is. Like, how was this game made in 2011? A little bit north of the lake is Venter's Place, which isn't really all that interesting. It's kind of just this house and this little ranch around here. I guess these people can, set up their little ranch and stables in this area. I guess it's just kind of a normal old ranch, but this has a little bit of a thing in Red Dead Redemption 2 where you can go here and there's an event here where you can meet these Del Lobos who are posted up in this house. And I guess they rob the people who live there. But in Red Dead Redemption 1, I don't really think there's anything unique to it. So it isn't really all that interesting. Next up, I visited Two Crows. And Two Crows is an abandoned place in Red Dead Redemption 1. And Red Dead Redemption 2, there's actually the donkey lady here. And there's actually like a house. So I guess in between the game of Red Dead Redemption 1 and Red Dead Redemption 2, it has been basically fully destroyed. And a lot of the stuff here has been, moved around or moved out of this area. It's another one of those places that has just been abandoned in Red Dead Redemption 1. A lot of these places are just seemingly abandoned, which doesn't make a ton of sense because there are a lot of places that have also sprouted up in between games. So I don't understand why certain places got abandoned and certain places just sprouted up in between the two games. But this is an interesting one because a lot is changed in between the two games, where the donkey lady's here and there are a lot of other things that are kind of taken away in Red Dead Redemption 1. I then went over to Riley's Charge, and Riley's Charge is a little bit west of that last place, and it's a battlefield, I believe, from the Civil War era, and it's this old battlefield. Kind of reminds me of Bulger Glade in Red Dead Redemption 2, but I guess it was a battlefield during the Civil War, and there were some skirmishes out in the west during the Civil War, but there weren't a ton of crazy ones, so maybe this is like one of the few places that there actually was a battle around here during the Civil War. But it is a pretty cool place to check out because similar to Bulger Glade, it really does feel like a real battle took place here, and it seems like this was taking place where you have to the right of it, you have someone's actual house here, so I guess they took over this dude's house, and then they started this battlefield. But I don't know if there was like a real battle here or if it was just more of like setting up everything in this area, because it doesn't look like there's a ton of like scars from the land that you'd see normally with war. It just seems kind of like they set up here and maybe they shot a couple things, but there wasn't like a huge battle like Bulger Glade in Red Dead Redemption 2. Heading south from this area, you can get over to Del Lobo Rock, which is kind of like a normal-ish rock in this area, but you do get some of the best views of Mexico from New Austin in this area. Just an absolutely beautiful area where you can see the water, you can see the river, and you can see all the way into a lot of Mexico, which we will be exploring later. So I do think that is just like one of the more beautiful views that you can get in New Austin. There are a lot of places that are pretty beautiful, but that's probably my favorite one. And then the other place you can go visit is this little cabin here, which is also kind of like another abandoned cabin. It just seems weird that there are so many places in New Austin that are abandoned. Maybe that is just like a common thing in like Westerns. Like, I guess it is a kind of common thing to find an abandoned homestead, but it just seems weird that New Austin has so many different abandoned places that you can stumble upon, and just how often like John will remark on it. He's like, I wonder what happened here. I wonder how these people left this area. I wonder what happened in this location. It's just like John doesn't know what else happened in this location, and I'm just kind of wondering why so many of these different houses got abandoned. Maybe just the people got too old and they had to move to a city, or maybe they just didn't want to live there anymore. I then headed into Armadillo, and Armadillo is probably the biggest city in New Austin. It probably is a little bit bigger than Thieves Landing and McFarland Ranch, but it just feels like the center of New Austin itself, and like especially the economic center. It's kind of in the middle of New Austin. Everything kind of flows through this area, and it's also connected to the railroad, which is very important because that's the reason why Tumbleweed became a ghost town during this time period. But looking around Armadillo itself, it doesn't really seem to be in the greatest of conditions. Like looking at the sheriff's office, it seems to be a little bit run down. You can go over here, and this is probably one of the coolest things about Armadillo in the actual game. I believe this is the only place where you can watch movies. I might be wrong about that. You might be able to do it in Blackwater as well, but the fact that you can watch like real movies that they play in the actual game is super cool. I know you can do this in GTA 5 as well, but I just think it's like such an interesting thing to see like real movies. I don't think you can do that in Red Dead Redemption 2. Like they obviously have certain movies, but they're not like as fleshed out as these ones. And then going throughout the rest of the town in Armadillo, again, everything just seems a little bit more run down than you'd expect, which kind of lines up with the cholera thing in Red Dead Redemption 2. It is funny because the cholera thing was definitely thrown in the last like year of development, or like last year or two of development, because they realized they weren't going to be able to like put all of New Austin into Red Dead Redemption 2, but it kind of works out in Red Dead Redemption 1 because you explore around the town. It doesn't seem like anything has been added recently, and it seems like this is a town that's been kind of worn down for at least 10 to 15 years at this point, because there's no like new buildings or new developments here. It kind of just feels like all these buildings have been here for a while and there's nothing that has sprung up recently. But eventually this guy did ask me to duel, and the thing about Armadillo is that a lot of these people are always just fighting and there's a lot of duels. And, you know, as John Marston, you have to take any duel that you can have with these people because you have to protect your honor as John. And if someone is going to challenge you, like this guy, Tobias Weldon, if he's going to challenge me, if he's going to challenge John Marston, like you have to take this guy's challenge and then make him regret it. And John says it's his funeral, but because I'm John Marston, especially the highest honor John Marston, I'm not going to make it this guy's funeral. I just shoot him in the hand and it's just instant GG's for him. Get a little bit of fame. But overall, I think Armadillo is just such an interesting town to go visit because it just doesn't really feel like a town that a lot of people are living in and like spending a lot of time in. Like obviously there are people in the town and there are a ton of people, you know, throughout the town that you can see are actually working on stuff, like the blacksmith over here. And, you know, all these people are like actually working in the town, but it just doesn't really feel like a Wild West town. Because I feel like when you go to a Wild West town in real life, like I would expect a lot of these towns to be built up like super newly and they're like built up in recent times, but it just doesn't really feel like Armadillo is like that. It feels like Armadillo has been kind of weathered down for a while. And maybe that's just because it is in 1911 where it's like the height of the Wild West is like the 80s. But I feel like if it is in 1911, it probably has moved past being like fully a Wild West town and moved into something a little bit newer. I then went to check out the rest of the town, and again, it's like looking at the saloon here, it just looks run down. It looks like not a lot of people are spending time repairing it. And then you go over to the train station as well, and even the train station looks pretty run down at this point. But then I see this guy running past, and this other guy says that his horse just got rustled clean out from under me. And I'm like, bro, I have had that happen so many times to me in Red Dead Redemption 1. I have to say this guy, honestly, also, I'm John Marston, the GOAT, and I can snipe this guy from super far way away, so I have to do it. I have to keep up the honor points and keep up the fame for John Marston. But bro, the horse ran so far away. I was like, how am I supposed to go and get it? I mean, it wasn't that hard to go get, but it just did go a little bit further than I was expecting away. Some of these events, I feel like, are super interesting because they kind of can evolve into something that's a little bit bigger than just like a random event would be. But I do think Red Dead Redemption 1 is so cool because of how many random interactions there are and just how the world actually feels alive. Like things are happening outside of you, the player, which just, I don't know, it makes the game feel so much more unique and so much more alive, which I think is something that Red Dead Redemption 2 did a great job of as well, and I think GTA 6 will probably also improve on this, as I've heard there's going to be a ton of different random interactions. But I eventually brought this guy his horse back, and of course he's going to be super grateful because, you know, I did just save this guy's horse. Like, I don't know how much a horse costs during this time period in terms of like days of work, but at least it probably costs like a week worth of work. And that's like for a bad horse, and maybe this guy had an actual good horse, so he was probably pretty thankful. But Armadillo itself is just a pretty cool town. I just think it's so interesting how much there is going on there and yet how old it is. I then went over to the Hanging Rock, and the Hanging Rock is another kind of rock formation. Not really that much going on here, but it's funny because it's called the Hanging Rock, and yet they actually hang people on this tree here. Like, obviously I wasn't expecting them to hang them on a rock, but like if it's called the Hanging Rock, I feel like there'd be more hanging on the rock rather than just being a tree next to the rock that they hang people on. But I do just think it is a little bit funny. That's called the hanging rock, and yet the tree is the thing that people are getting hung on. I then ran into this guy who also needed to take down some criminals, and this guy wanted one of the criminals to be taken to Armadillo because he can only fit one on his horse, which this is one of the weirder random encounters I've had in a while. Like, I've never seen this one in the actual game. Most of the other ones are like pretty easy to get, but like bringing back one criminal back to Armadillo, and this guy is also like part of the Armadillo Sheriff thing, and you know, again, like in game there's only 3 members of the Armadillo Sheriff Department. They say that they're understaffed, so I don't know who this guy is and if he's connected to Marshall Johnson or any of the other people, but I do think it is kind of interesting that there are like a couple of random encounters that kind of go against the actual lore of the game. I think it does like add a little bit, but at the same time, it kind of like takes away a lot because in the game, it's like in Armadillo, they don't have a sheriff. They don't really have a lot of these people. And then, you know, bandits attack. This just kind of reminds me of a lot of the Red Dead Redemption 2 things where it's like you get a bounty and then you bring it back, but then because I'm so close to Armadillo, they're not going to follow me into the actual town itself. So that's basically the end of it. Like, I don't know. It's just kind of funny that you go and bandits try to chase you and then you immediately get into town and they're like, all right, I'll leave you alone. But overall, kind of a cool random encounter, but it's just kind of weird to do anything with the sheriff in Armadillo because you know these people. A little bit west of that area where we had that encounter, we find Two Crows, and Two Crows is another one where as soon as you get there, you have to take out all of these people. And since this is a repeatable challenge, you basically are forced to just shoot these people every single time you come back. And I do think that is one of the drawbacks about some of these locations in Red Dead Redemption 1, especially this one, where I'm like, do I really care about starting these challenges every single time I come back to Two Rocks here? The other cool thing about Two Rocks, though, is that this is the only location that is in Red Dead Redemption 1, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Red Dead Revolver, because it's one of the places in Red Dead Revolver, and then it got, you know, ported over to Red Dead Redemption 1, Red Dead Redemption 2, so it is a pretty cool place, and I do feel like it's unique in that sense, but I don't really think it's all that cool of an area, and I feel like all these challenges are just a little bit not that interesting because you have to do them over and over again, and yeah, you can beat your time, but it's not that fun. The next place I went was Rattlesnake Hollow, and Rattlesnake Hollow is kind of an interesting location because there's not really that much actually going on here, but it technically is like a named location in the actual game, and it's mainly because you can go and find a bunch of these little holes in the wall here, or like in the mountain, which I don't know, it's kind of like a cool thing to go and explore, but there's not much going on. Like, yeah, there's a little bit of loot that you can get, but it is just kind of like a weird place that you can go and find in game, and I just don't really know why it's like a named location. Yeah, it's kind of cool. Yeah, there's a bunch of caves here, but is it really all that interesting as a location? Not really. Another location that I passed by while heading into this area was Pleasant's house, and Pleasant's house, again, it's a house. There is a stranger mission that's connected to this one, but I don't really think it's that cool, and I didn't want to, you know, go up to it and do the stranger mission, and there's just not really that much going on in this area. Overall, like, kind of a cool area, but there's not much going on at Pleasant's house. We then head over to Oddfellows Rest, which is another cemetery, but this one is kind of in the middle of nowhere, which doesn't really make a ton of sense. Like, obviously, you can have cemeteries that aren't next to towns, but, like, having one that this is just like this far out and doesn't really seem to be connected to any specific settlement just seems a little weird, especially when you have like one in Cooch Chapel and one in Tumbleweed. Like, who is burying their family here? Like, I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting one. And then a little bit south of Oddfellows Rest, we can get into Jorge's Gap, which is this really cool like rock formation, which seems like a stream carved through it. And this is a really cool one in Undead Nightmare because a bunch of zombies will get in here and you can just run through them, especially if you have the fire horse. But overall, it is just a really cool rock formation to kind of go through even during the regular game, although there's really nothing going on here. Just like a very interesting method and kind of like a nice path that's carved straight through the rock. Just a super cool place to go and check out and just kind of explore. I then continued my way into New Austin, eventually finding this ambush here, which is kind of weird because you can clearly see these guys, you know, right behind the coach here. And I'm just like, you guys really were trying to ambush me with this girl and then being like, oh, I'm just a poor little girl, can you help me out? And then you guys are just posted up behind the stagecoach. Like, at least you could have posted up on the other side of the stagecoach where you wouldn't be seen by John. But I'm just like, it's so easy to see you if you're just on one side of it and you're not reacting at all. After that, I went over to Mercer Station, and Mercer Station is an abandoned railway station. This one is also, again, another weird one to me. Like, why is Mercer Station fully destroyed and abandoned by this time period? I don't know. I guess it was probably used more during the war, it being something that was connected over to Fort Mercer, where it's like maybe they bring the supplies here, then goes to Fort Mercer, and then going over, there also is a new ranch that is only in Red Dead Redemption 1, so I guess it must have been built during this time period. This one, at least compared to the other ranch that we saw a little bit earlier, that's like by McFarland Ranch, this one at least seems a little bit worn in, so like I can kind of understand why they didn't want to put it in Red Dead Redemption 2, but at the same time, it doesn't look like as new as the other one, but it definitely looks new enough. The barn, though, and like this outhouse here definitely look a little bit more worn in. So I feel like those ones could have been there. Like, it seemed like the house at least is pretty new because it has like a new fresh paint job. But overall, I mean, it's kind of like a cool place. In this area, I feel like could have some development in the future. I then went all the way up to Fort Mercer. And again, very similar to the places like Twin Rocks and like all these other places, you get this challenge that you have to do every single time you come here. And I'm like, bro, like, why is there a challenge every single time I come here, especially with this guy? Like, I've been here multiple times on this save, and you still have to do the exact same thing every time, where John goes up through the side and then he has to do the same challenge, taking out everyone in Fort Mercer. I just feel like Fort Mercer could have been a cool place to kind of have like a couple things going on. In Undead Nightmare, it's kind of like this cool area where you can do bounties and stuff like that. I feel like in the actual game, it would have been a little bit cooler to have like something else going on rather than it just being like a shootout every time. Like, I understand a gang probably makes sense to control this at a lot of the time period during the actual game, but like, I don't know, it's just a little weird to like every single time you go there, you have to have the exact same challenge. We have to shoot out all these guys and kill all these criminals in this fort here. It just seems a little bit weird to me. I don't know. It just kind of like feels a little bit like lore breaking, but at the same time, like, I understand why they want to do this, but I just wish there was a way where it's like you can replay this if you want, but you don't have to like be forced into it every single time you come to Fort Mercer. It would also be super cool to like have one mission where you kind of like clear out the fort and you can maybe like retake it for some good people, because it's like every single time you go in here, you have to take out these same criminals and nothing changes at all. It'd be cool to like kind of take out the criminals and then, you know, maybe some good people move in and you can kind of help them out, because it seems like there are other people in the fort. Like, there are all these working women who are also in this area, and like, I don't know what they're doing, like, especially once you clear out the fort, because maybe they just let in the new criminals that are trying to come into this area at that point. Like, I don't know. It just seems a little weird that like every single time you clear out Fort Mercer, it just automatically goes back to, oh, the criminals are back inside. But either way, like, Fort Mercer is a pretty interesting place because I believe it was supposed to be built for the Civil War or the Mexican-American War. And it's just kind of like this dilapidated fort that has kind of become a criminal hideout, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, this would be probably the best place to run a criminal gang. This is the place where Bill Williamson is holed up for a lot of the game in Red Dead Redemption 1. And just overall just seems like a perfect place to run the gang out of, because you have a nice solid place that the lawmen aren't really going to get inside very easily. And it just doesn't really like make sense for the lawmen to try to attack Fort Mercer, because you'd have to throw so many men at it, and it's like all you'd have to do is have 20 men here and you could probably repel like 100-man lawman enforcement. So overall, it does make sense that the gang members are always here, but it's like once you clear them out one singular time, it just feels like it should be something that maybe, you know, the good people own by this point, instead of having criminals in it every single time you come here. From Fort Mercer, I headed west and I ran into Repentance Rock. And Repentance Rock is another rock formation around the map of Red Dead Redemption 1. And there are a lot of really cool rock formations around Red Dead Redemption 1. Repentance Rock, I do feel like, is a little bit underwhelming. Like, yeah, it's a cool rock formation, but it kind of just reminds me of like a worse version of a lot of the Mexican rocks. And a lot of the Mexican rocks don't have cool names like Repentance Rock that you get to run into every time you go over to them. And Repentance Rock does have at least some stuff going on. I believe there's like a whole mystery around Repentance Rock that you can like explore. Like I think I covered that in my mysteries iceberg back in the day, but I don't really remember much about it. I think it's connected to like this little camp here as well, which I don't know, is kind of like a cool place to go visit, but there's not really that much going on with Repentance Rock. It is a pretty cool and unique rock formation, but I just don't really think it's all that like interesting of a place to go visit in the game. I just feel like a lot of the rock formations, especially in New Austin, just kind of pale in comparison to the ones in Mexico. I then headed all the way south until I finally ran into Plainview, and this is a place where they're extracting oil from the ground, and honestly, it's probably one of the richer places in the entire game. It seems like they're getting a lot of oil from this area. This is definitely a big thing for the economy of Red Dead Redemption 1. Armadillo is probably making a lot of money by, you know, getting people over to Plainview. You have like the little worker hut here. It kind of reminds me of like the timber company or the railroad company in Red Dead Redemption 2, where you kind of have these workers here, and then you have like kind of all the like normal workers, and then you have the one like overseer, one leader, and it kind of just like reminds me of what happened during those times, because they're probably not treating the workers all that well. Like these guys have to work on the oil things. They're probably dying sometimes. Like that's what happens when you work in an oil field. But overall, I do think Plainview is a pretty cool place to go visit. It just feels like something that is going to be built up really soon, and it's kind of just getting started at this point. Everyone's living in camps, and eventually they're going to have permanent housing for a lot of these people, but not now. It's kind of all just like building in camps, and especially when they only have, you know, a couple of these oil derricks up at the moment, and they're kind of like building a lot more of them up. Like that one's not ready. This one's also getting built. This one is, I guess, working at this time period, but a lot of them are continuously getting built. So they're going to continuously add more and more develop into this area and just continuously get bigger and bigger as a little community. Heading a little bit southwest of this area is the Frontera Bridge. This is the railroad connection from New Austin into Mexico. There is another railroad connection as well, but I feel like this one is kind of the main one. This one's used in Undead Nightmare when you want to get into Mexico. I feel like it's probably just the more easy way to get into Mexico at this point. I mean, it's just right connected here. And then, you know, as I was doing that, you know, this cougar just starts chasing after me and trying to get me. And then, you know, I have to put a bullet into this dude's skull. I then headed north from this area into Solomon's Folly. And Solomon's Folly is another place that you have a little bit of a mission going on, where this one, they actually robbed the bank in Armadillo. And this guy has been tracking them ever since, trying to get the bank's safe back, which I do think is kind of cool. You also have like specifically the Walton gang are the guys over here. Like I do like when they specifically name the gangs who are in this area. And, you know, this is kind of a cool one. This area is just a little bit run down and abandoned. It's also very similar in Red Dead Redemption 2, where it's owned by the Del Lobos during this point. And I just think it's a pretty interesting area where you can go and you find these guys. And I think at least this mission is kind of cool because you have like a specific reason for it, where these guys have stolen the safe from these people and they're trying to get it back. And like the sheriff is trying to get it back, and he needs someone to tag along with him to take out the gang here. And John, just because he's a great person, does it and eventually brings it all the way back to Armadillo. So he gets a little bit of honor, and, you know, he can just feel like a good person because he saved the bank. I then continued north up the railroad to get over to Benedict Point. And Benedict Point is just kind of really just a train station in Red Dead Redemption 1. There is a little bit of a shed on one side, and you also have the stables here, but there's not much going on at Benedict Point besides just being a train station. It just seems like it's a train station for a lot of the rural communities in this area, and there's really not that much else going on in this area. Benedict Point is not all that interesting, and there's just not much to do here. I then continued to follow the railroad over to Benedict Pass, where you have the railroad going over a little small area, and then eventually to this area where there's this little 3-point turn between all the different parts of the railroad before continuing even further this way and starting to head north over to the next place we're visiting, which is Ridgewood Farm. And Ridgewood Farm there's not that much going on either with Ridgewood Farm. It kind of just reminds me of a smaller version of McFarland Ranch, like what McFarland Ranch was looking like maybe, I don't know, 20 years before the game starts. But one of the weird things about when I came here was, I was just like riding, doing my own thing. And then this guy just somehow gets mad at me and starts shooting at me. So then I shoot back at him, obviously. And then I somehow lose honor for this. And then there are more guys coming into the town. They're bringing a guy on the back of their horse. So I save this guy on the back of their horse. I don't know why they were dragging him around. And then only get 20 honor to get it back. What are we doing here? And then I continue even further north and continue on the railroad from that side, because the railroad doesn't go all the way over to Ridgewood Farm, and get to Hamlin's Passing. Hamlin's Passing seems like it is a Native American wagon circle, or I think to protect against Native Americans, which is called a wagon circle, which a lot of the early settlers were doing this time period. And it seems really similar to a lot of the ones in Red Dead Redemption 1, where I think there's also a wagon circle in this area. There's also a bunch of arrows in this, so they're probably attacked by Native Americans. I just know wagon circles were a very common thing to do against Native Americans, because they give you a good amount of protection against the Native Americans' arrows if they are attacking you in this area. So I'm assuming that's what it is, but there doesn't seem to be any specific lore around this location. It just seems like a good old wagon circle in this area. The next place I visited was Rathskeller's Fork, and it is, kind of an okay place. It's like a traveler's lounge where you have a little hotel segment, you got the saloon. It seems more of a place where, you're coming in, you're a traveler, you're in the area, you're spending a little time in Rathskeller's Fork, but you're not spending a ton of time here. It doesn't really seem like there's much of a town. It's kind of just a place for travelers to come and spend a little time before they leave the area. But it is in kind of a weird spot to be a traveler's location, just because it is right next to the mountains. I believe I said in one of the other ones that it's only next to the mountains because they have to put a border here. But some people said in the comments that there's a lore reason why it's next to the mountains, but I don't understand why you'd have a traveler's hotel motel area right next to the mountains, because it doesn't seem like a place that people would normally travel through. Normally you'd have it on a travel route instead of being right next to the mountains. Maybe there's supposed to be a pass there or something, where Rathskeller's Fork is in the middle of the pass rather than being fully surrounded by mountains on three sides, because that kind of restricts a lot of travelers from just going through this area. But overall, Rathskeller's Fork is kind of a cool area, but there's not that much going on here. South of Rathskeller's Fork, we get over to Silent Stead, and Silent Stead is a weird one to me because it's just another abandoned place, but this one at least is a little bit closer to Rathskeller's Fork, so I could see it being used as a place that is, housing people that work at Rathskeller's Fork. But again, it just seems weird that there's so many different abandoned places throughout this area. This one at least does make a little bit more sense because this is closer to Tumbleweed, so I can understand why someone would want to leave this area. And it doesn't really seem like it's all that great for grazing either, so I can totally understand why this one's abandoned. It just seems weird that there's so many different abandoned places in New Austin though. I continued heading south until I got into this random encounter, and then I saw these guys that were torturing this guy. They're about to execute him, and then I put a bullet in this guy's head in Deadeye, and I missed somehow. How does that miss at all? I should have saved this guy. I don't know how he died here, because I literally perfectly put a bullet in this dude's head, but it just somehow missed in game. I don't know how that even happened. I was a little bit mad when this happened, but overall, I don't really care about saving every single person's life. The next place I visited was called Cueva Seca, and I don't think this is a location in Red Dead Redemption 2, but I do think this is a pretty cool place to go visit in Red Dead Redemption 1, because it kind of just feels like these people took over this cave and made it a little, habitation spot. It just kind of reminds me of a lot of the times when humans lived in caves, which was 12,000 years ago, when they'd be living in caves because that was the safest and driest spot. It's just kind of cool that you have people living in caves as well in Red Dead Redemption 1. I don't know. It's just kind of a cool spot to check out, because normally people don't live in caves, but it is a pretty good place for shelter because you're kind of protected from the elements and from the rain. Another place that has a kind of unwanted attack challenge you have to do whenever you visit it is Tumbleweed, and I think Tumbleweed is kind of the worst version of this, because at least with Fort Mercer and some of the other places, they're small locations and you don't really really care about like, fully exploring them, because Fort Mercer, what is there really to explore? But Tumbleweed is like a fully abandoned town. Like, why do I have to fight people every single time I go into it? And why do I have to shoot this guy that is being hung every single time I go into it? Like, I feel like at least this one, they could have just allowed you to explore it a little bit and have like maybe 1 or 2 challenges. But just the fact that you have to go every single time to Tumbleweed and always have to do this Tumbleweed challenge just is a little bit weird to me, because Tumbleweed actually is cool to explore. It is this abandoned location that you can explore and check out, and there are a lot of pretty interesting things in Tumbleweed, so the fact that you have to clear it out every single time you want to go visit it is just a little bit annoying. But overall, I do think Tumbleweed obviously is a very interesting town, because in Red Dead Redemption 2, it actually is a kind of thriving town. Overall, I think it's really interesting because Tumbleweed is a good example of like using geography to tell a story in game. There's a reason why Tumbleweed was abandoned, and because a lot of the places in New Austin as well are abandoned, and Tumbleweed is one of them that's abandoned because the railroad doesn't go through here. It just does make a lot of sense in game, because Tumbleweed is this place that is kind of hard to get to unless you go through like the normal routes, and it just kind of like raised up on this bluff away from other towns, which does make it like a hard town to get to. And it seems like a lot of the economy was connected to mining in this area. If you go around, they have like Gaptooth Breaches in the area, which is a huge mining facility, and I'm assuming a lot of people were working at that. But at the same time, Gaptooth Breach has also been taken over by criminals, so if you take over a full like mining facility with criminals, it probably makes it a lot harder for the normal people in the area to have jobs. And then when you also have criminals all throughout the town like the Del Lobos, it just in general makes it a really hard place to sustainably have a town when there are criminals all throughout the city, and when there just aren't a ton of people that want to live in the town. You also can see that a lot of the big buildings, even in Red Dead Redemption 2, were also kind of run down by the point of Red Dead Redemption 2. So just having all these people that don't really want to live in the town, and if there isn't anything like mining that like will get people to live in the town, and then also the railroad has kind of surpassed the town, it just makes it a place that no one wants to live anymore, and that's why they do eventually fully abandon the town. But overall, I do think Tumbleweed is just such a cool place to go visit. I just wish you didn't have to shoot your way through the town every single time you wanted to visit it, because there are a lot of cool things going on in Tumbleweed. One of the most unique and interesting things about Tumbleweed, though, is the actual church here, because in the church at the sermon area, it says the devil has gotten into that beast, and a lot of people think that the devil either cursed the town of Tumbleweed or there's some connection there, and I don't really think that's all that true, because that is just a cheat code there, and it does make Tumbleweed a little bit cooler because there's like some scary things going on there, but it just kind of reminds me of a lot of these other towns, and just in general, New Austin has a lot of places that are abandoned, so it does make sense that Tumbleweed was abandoned as well. The church is a pretty cool place to go visit. It just feels, I don't know, like kind of creepy and scary, but it does just look so similar to Coots Chapel that I would assume they reused a lot of the assets from Coots Chapel to make this one, or vice versa, so it doesn't feel as unique as some of the churches in maybe Mexico. Gaptooth Breach is another place that you're forced into one of these challenges where you have to shoot out every single person in the area, but I do think Gaptooth Breach at least makes a little bit more sense for there to be a challenge every single time. Like, again, I do agree with like Fort Mercer as well, where it does make sense that you kind of have to fight criminals every time you go there, because it just feels like a place that criminals would always take over, although it would be easy enough for normal people to take it over and then just always protect it against the criminals. But Gaptooth Breach really feels like a criminal hotspot, because it feels like a place that you could, have as a criminal gang and make a lot of money from and always want to take over, where anytime, normal people take it over, you're always going to want to take it back as the criminal gang. And it's just like a very valuable piece of property for a gang to have. In general, though, I don't think Gaptooth Breach is all that interesting. I feel like in Red Dead Redemption 2, it's a little bit more interesting because at least it's connected to Tumbleweed, and it's probably funded a lot of the things that go on in Tumbleweed, because Tumbleweed really is just a mining town that exists to just be a place for all the mining workers to live while they're on break, I guess, from the mining area. And I do think the one cool thing about Gaptooth Breach in Red Dead Redemption 1 is that you actually have a full mine system. That's one of the things that kind of pisses me off about Red Dead Redemption 2's Gaptooth Breach, is that you have this super cool cave system in Red Dead Redemption 1 that you like explore multiple times. It's in multiple different missions, I think, in Red Dead Redemption 1 that you can go and like explore this entire cave system. And it is pretty cool to just go down and like fight people in the cave here. But in Red Dead Redemption 2, it's just fully blocked off at the front, like right here. And I'm just like, why are you fully blocking it off? I'm assuming it was just development time. It's like, we don't really need to add an entire Gaptooth Breach mine system if no one really cares. But maybe I'm just the one person that actually cares, because I do feel like exploring mines is super cool in game. And I think the Red Dead Redemption 1 mine here is just super cool to go into, because there's just kind of a lot going on down here. So overall, I do think Gaptooth Breach is a pretty cool place to go visit in the game. It just feels so unique from a lot of the other places, because there are some other mines that you can go visit, but there's nothing with this big of a mine system, and you can kind of get lost down here. Like, it's not all that crazy to get lost. Like, it's not that big of an area, but it just does have kind of a confusing layout that like everything kind of moves in and together, and just is a very cool place to explore as a normal person. And finishing off the side of all of the west of New Austin, we can see this area that you can see all the way into Mexico, and there's really not that much going on in this location. You do have some beautiful water views in this area, but the western version of New Austin is really not all that interesting, especially like the super far out west side. Like, there is a Sea of Coronado as well, but I don't really think that's all that interesting in Red Dead Redemption 1. But the last place we're going to be visiting is the Scratching Post, and the Scratching Post is, I don't know, like another abandoned area, but this one at least I feel like is built in a cooler way. It's used in a couple of different missions, especially in Undead Nightmare. There's just like the place where a lot of the U.S. Army soldiers are posted up, but I do like the kind of brick building as well with the wood roof. But there's not that much going on here. At least in Red Dead Redemption 2, there is like some things to look at, and it is a little bit creepy, but it just overall is a really creepy and weird abandoned home in New Austin. And now we completely leave the western side of New Austin to go all the way over to the more eastern side around the border to Mexico, where we first find Manteca Falls. This area is just south of like McFarland Ranch, so the first place we visited, and you get these absolutely beautiful waterfalls. I mean, this area is pretty good looking, but I do think this area is a little bit underutilized in the actual game. Like, the falls are really cool, and it'd be so interesting to see a mission where you like go over the falls. Like, there obviously is the one in Red Dead Redemption 2 where they go over the falls, but I feel like it'd be super cool to have something that's like first person where you're going over falls. I feel like that could be something cool in GTA 6 where you're like actually like going over with the physics. And you also have Miller's Crossing, I believe, which is the border crossing in New Mexico, the other railroad crossing that you can go into it. This is also using like 1 or 2 missions in Red Dead Redemption 1. Not all that important. And then from here we head down into the old Bacchus place, which is a kind of weird spot to visit in Red Dead Redemption 1 because it's mainly used as a place where you go to meet Seth in a lot of these quests. But then you visit it in free roam, and you can see that just other people are somehow in this house here. I guess by this point in the game, potentially Seth has left this area, but at the same time, like, how have new people moved in and like are clearly using this house by this time frame? It just is a little bit weird that you have a whole new family that's moved in by the time of Red Dead Redemption 1 when Seth is just not there. And then somehow a stranger comes down, finds me when I'm in this area that's kind of like protected from a lot of things, and says that they're stringing up his wife, so I have to go help him. And, you know, obviously I am going to go help him, or maybe it was brother as well. I don't really know with this one, but of course I'm going to go help this guy because I'm just a genuine good person. I'm good honor John Marston, but like, how did this guy find me? It just seems a little weird, and why could he not ask, you know, the other people at this place? And it was a little bit hard to find where this is actually happening, but eventually I was a little bit too late to save this guy's friend, and they did die there. So overall, didn't really work out that well. And next up, we head over to Thieves Landing. Thieves Landing is one of the larger towns in the entire game, and Thieves Landing reminds me a lot of Las Vegas. It kind of is this place for all the vice and gambling to happen here, and while there is some other industries in this area, like there is some shipbuilding as well, and there are some boats that are kind of connected into Thieves Landing, it doesn't seem like there's a ton of like other economy or other things going on besides like the actual gambling aspect. Like, yes, there is, a thing for making shipping yards, and there is boats that come into this area, but it seems like all this is a little bit rusted down in comparison to the areas where you actually have like the gambling. Like, you look at the pawn shop, it seems to be in pretty good condition, but like the ship area seems to be all rusted out and made of these like metal shingles on the top. These don't really seem to be in the best condition, although they are in fine enough condition for people to use it. But you look at this one side, and like the thing is, Thieves Landing is kind of split into two different areas, where you have the gambling area on one side and then you have the shipping area on one side, which is a pretty cool distinction and kind of a good way to kind of separate the two new towns. And even in Red Dead Redemption 2, they only have the shipping part, so this all has happened in the last couple of years, which doesn't really make a ton of sense when you look at it in the actual game, but it is kind of cool. And then when I got here, I found this woman who's getting attacked by this man, and she's a working girl, and I need to save her because honestly, I'm good John Marston. These other guys start shooting at me as well, have to take them out as well. But overall, Thieves Landing is a really interesting place to visit because, again, it's kind of just like all the vice and gambling condensed into one area. Just really feels Las Vegas-y, like in the 50s when the mafia controlled it, where you kind of just have this area that is very gambling and there's a lot of bad things happening here, but it's mainly used like that because it's the one place where bad things can happen. And it just really reminds me more of like a Wild Western town, except, there are a couple things like being in the swamp doesn't really make it all that Wild West, but it is a really cool, interesting place to visit because it seems like this area is going to continue to grow. A lot more people are going to be using this area because, having both a shipping economy and something that's based around tourism/gambling just does make it a place where there is going to be a lot of growth in the future for Thieves Landing. So I think Thieves Landing would continue to grow if you had the game go into like the 20s or the 30s, and then I think the Great Depression would hit this one extremely hard. Leaving Thieves Landing, you can then go over Dixon Crossing, which is probably one of the most boring bridges that is like this long in the actual game. There's not much going on, but it is a nice little swampy area. I then went over to the wreck of the Serendipity, which I do think is a very cool place to explore in Red Dead Redemption 1, and probably the place that I feel like is missed the most in Red Dead Redemption 2 because it isn't in Red Dead Redemption 2 at all, and it just doesn't really make sense. Like, this seems like it's been there for at least 20 plus years. Like, you can see how much moss is growing on it and how the plants have kind of reclaimed it. Like, clearly it should at least be there in the epilogue, if not even all the way in 1899 when Arthur and everyone robs everything in Blackwater. So it seems like a place that definitely should be in the actual game of Red Dead Redemption 2, and just has kind of a lot going on here. You can see that there used to be, shops out here as well. I'm just kind of confused on like, did this boat sink beforehand? Like, was there the dock here beforehand, or did it sink and then they built the dock to it? It's kind of just a weird thing that doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, maybe the boat was in actual port here and then it sunk somehow. I don't know. There's just kind of a lot of things that don't make a ton of sense for the Serendipity because, like, yeah, how did it sink? And also, how do like other ships get by this area? Because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of space in between the Serendipity that other ships could go past. Like, obviously they could make it past, but if you're a similar sized ship like the Serendipity, how are you going to get past it and then go all the way down to Thieves Landing when there is such a tight kind of crossing next to it? But visiting the actual Serendipity, you can tell that this was like a pretty expensive ship. Like, if you are going to go on this, you're probably a pretty wealthy person. And just in general, I think the Serendipity is a cool location. It kind of reminds me of a lot of these ships that have turned into like ecosystems, where when a shipwreck happens, they turn into its own ecosystem here. And the Serendipity is really only used in one mission, where you meet a guy here that supposedly is working for Dutch and is a contact of Dutch's. But overall, I just do think the Serendipity is a really cool place to go visit because it just kind of reminds you of like visiting a real shipwreck. And although it's not actually underwater, I feel like it does a good job of like kind of representing what would happen to a ship underwater. Although a wood ship like this would get absolutely destroyed underwater, unlike the metal ships in real life that probably would be turned into something like this. So it's kind of like a mix of a wooden and a kind of like what you think of like an actual shipwreck happening. I then went over to the Pacific Union Railroad camp, and this is mainly used as a place where they build, I believe, the trains for the railroad. So this is where, you know, people are working on the trains, and then the trains get sent and they can go on the railroad, which actually is a pretty cool thing. Like the fact that you have a connection to the railroad. A lot of times they don't have things that are like working on the railroad. So it is cool to have something that is like an actual support system to the railroad instead of like something in Red Dead Redemption 2 where there's no actual support system to the railroad. I guess you can count like Saint Denis as like a support system to the railroad where they can work on the trains there and do stuff there. But like here, it really is like they're building the trains here and then they're getting sent on the railroad, which just feels really cool. It also kind of reminds me of a lot of the other workstations you have in Red Dead Redemption 1 or Red Dead Redemption 2, and it kind of reminds me of something like Plainview, where you have all these different people who are working on different parts. And the fact that they have things that are so realistic, where it's like one dude is just working on his little area over there, and the other dudes are kind of working on their own things over here, it just feels super realistic. And I do think this is a place that probably would grow after the game happens, because you do have this railroad camp that is very close to Thieves Landing, so it could kind of make this like a mega city in between them, where they would both grow out and kind of like form into this larger city. Obviously, I do think in real life they would probably be a little bit further away than they are in the actual game, so maybe they wouldn't make a mega city, but I do think a lot of the people here are probably going over to Thieves Landing, you know, spending a lot of their money on gambling. And it is in a pretty good spot where you can kind of be a railroad camp worker and still have like a real life outside of it by going to Thieves Landing, even potentially by going over to McFarland Ranch or Blackwater. Like, it is a pretty good lifestyle to live here in comparison to something like Plainview, where you're so far away from everything else. So I can understand why there are so many different men that are working here. There's probably like 40 to 50 different people that are working on the railroad here, and it does make sense because these jobs would probably be also pretty high paying, as there are a lot of people that want to work on the railroad and there's just a lot of money flowing in. But I also did get this woman who came up to me and said I was just such a good person that she wanted to ask for some money to me. And of course, I am going to give her the money because I'm just the highest honor, John Marston. I always want to give money to people who deserve it more than me. Leaving the railroad camp and heading south into the Stillwater Creek area, you can go over Mason's Bridge. This is a bridge that is being worked on during Red Dead Redemption 2 and finally is finished, and actually is a pretty cool bridge. It seems like it was built extremely well, and also kind of like links up these two high spots between these areas, which I do think is pretty solid. Going over to Stillwater Creek is just kind of this swampy area, which is cool to explore, but there's not a ton going on here. There is like a stranger mission that you can do in this area, and there are these cool bridges that go over a lot of Stillwater Creek, but there's not really anything else that is like interesting to bring you to Stillwater Creek besides just this area being very unique to go visit, like being a kind of swampy area that reminds you of kind of like the deep south, or even this area around Texas where there are a lot of swamps like this. Overall, not really that interesting of a place to go visit, but a little bit up further you can see this other really cool bridge here, and just this area here is called Montana Ford, I believe, and this is the area where John and Jack, like, they push their herd that they get from Bonnie over here, which is a pretty cool location, and this area is just absolutely beautiful. I love the way the water looks underneath the bridge here, and the water just looks so realistic for being something in 2011. Like, obviously you can't go into the water in Red Dead Redemption, which does kind of suck, but again, it makes sense because John can't actually swim in game in lore, but the water looks absolutely beautiful. And then you go up here and you get to see the falls here, and the Manteca Falls are definitely a lot higher up, but this falls look absolutely so much better. I mean, you also get the beautiful blue water underneath it, and I feel like especially when you can contrast like the yellow grass here into the kind of like tall trees area and the water coming down, it just looks absolutely beautiful. And then going on the bridge itself, which is called Tanner's Span, this area is just absolutely breathtaking. I just think it's one of the most beautiful parts of the entire game of Red Dead Redemption 1, and it can even rival some of the places in Red Dead Redemption 2 for beauty. Then heading into the tall trees area, I found this man who was getting attacked by these wolves, so I first had to save him, but his horse did get eaten alive by these wolves during this time period, so it didn't really work out all that well. But then I somehow found a beaver here. I thought this was a wolf, so I did attack it, but like, why is there a beaver in this like little encounter? I was just kind of a little bit confused, like, why is there a beaver all the way up here with the wolves and this horse getting attacked? But Bear Claw Camp is really just used in a couple missions with Dutch, where you meet like Nastas here and you have a little bit of a conversation with Dutch. And Bear Claw Camp seems to just be kind of like a ruined, former abandoned area where they were going out to like hunt things. But there's not really that much going on with Bear Claw Camp. It does seem like it's kind of been reclaimed by other people, where when you visit Bear Claw Camp in Red Dead Redemption 1, you're almost always going to find some people camping around the area, some people using this area to maybe hunt things and, you know, do things in this area, because there are a lot of huge animals in the Tall Trees area. I feel like Tall Trees really feels like the most like wild part of Red Dead Redemption 1, and there are a lot more like wild parts of Red Dead Redemption 2, like in Amberino, or even in New Austin. In Red Dead Redemption 2, it feels a little bit more wild than in Red Dead Redemption 1, but clearly, like visiting Bear Claw Camp, you can see that people have kind of taken it over, but there's not really that much going on. There's not a lot of interactivity. It just seems like a couple people are just hunting around this area. I then went over to Manzanita Post, and Manzanita Post is kind of the main trading post in this area, and just the main thing in Tall Trees, because there isn't a ton going on in Tall Trees. Manzanita Post does feel a lot more realistic in Red Dead Redemption 1, just because in Red Dead Redemption 2 you have the whole like Skinner brothers in the area. Like in Red Dead Redemption 1, it really feels like there needs to be a trading post for people in this area that are going out hunting to kind of come back, restock some supplies. And there also obviously is the railway station here, so it makes sense that there's a trading post in this area. I feel like in Red Dead Redemption 2, it just doesn't really feel all that realistic, because like, why would people continue to live at Manzanita Post when there are, you know, bad people in the area that are attacking them? And there's not really any reason to go into Tall Trees, and there's also not the railway station. Like by the time of Red Dead Redemption 1, you have a lot more people that live in this area and people that are just kind of renting for the time being before they're going out on their hunting journeys. But overall, I do think Manzanita Post is kind of like a cool and interesting area. It just kind of feels like a little trading post and a cool place to stock up before you go out and hunt these wild beasts in Tall Trees. So I then went into Tall Trees itself, and I found this bear here. Tall Trees is pretty cool because you actually have like, it's the one place where you actually have a little bit of snow, but immediately I get attacked by a bear who takes out my horse because I was a little bit slow on it and instead had the rolling block rifle, and I did get to, you know, shoot the bear here and take it out, but it did take out my horse, so now I have to go on foot for the time being. But I did have to skin it just because, you know, if you're going to take out my horse, at least I need to get something from the bear here. And, you know, do get a little bit of the graphic scene from John. It isn't really all that interesting though, but I did continue up this way, and this is where one of the funniest things that happened throughout my entire playthrough happened. Like, I do think Tall Trees is a very interesting area because you actually have the snow here, but there also are just so many huge animals in this area and so many unique birds and other things that you can find in this area. So I continued on after leaving my horse because you have to wait like a small time period to get your horse back after, you know, your horse does die. Tried to go over to Tanner's Reach, and I saw this bald eagle passing by me, so I was like, wow, like there's a bald eagle here. I kind of want to shoot it and just see if, you know, I get to get like the bald eagle's like head or something, the bald eagle skin. So I do shoot it, and then right as that happens, I get attacked by two different bears who just somehow take me out. I then visited Tanner's Reach, and this is the cabin that Evelyn Miller uses in Red Dead Redemption 2, but I think it gets burned down in Red Dead Redemption 2, so I don't know how it got rebuilt during this time period in between the two games. Like, they could have just changed it to something else, but again, I just get attacked by more and more bears. Like, there is 4 bears in like a period of like 3 minutes. Like, what are we doing? I don't know. It's just so funny. go into this area and you just immediately get swamped by bears every single time. But Tanner's Reach isn't really that interesting of a cabin. I think it's honestly more interesting in Red Dead Redemption 2 when Evelyn Miller's there. But then this guy comes up to me and says they took my wife, and because I didn't save that other guy's brother, I did want to save at least one person during this mission, because these ones are kind of a little bit harder to like save the people when they're like either being hung or they're being potentially shot. Like it is a little bit harder to save them versus like a lot of the other ones where it's just like, oh, you just go and you shoot someone, you take back like a thief or something. But this guy is telling me he needs to save his wife, and you know, because I just felt bad, I did want to help him. I'm high honor John Marston. And then I eventually find his wife being hung by these people, and she says that she did nothing and she is wanted to be saved. But I think all these people are like potentially like Nastas, and they're like, you know, Dutch's gang here, which I do think is pretty cool that like Dutch's gang shows up in the Tall Trees area as well, because this is where they're kind of located. I then went over to Aurora's Basin, which is the major lake in the Tall Trees area. This place looks even more beautiful in Red Dead Redemption 1 because you have all the snow around it. You have these like snow-capped mountains. It just kind of looks like this picturesque place where you can just, you know, spend a little bit of time. And again, I get attacked by another bear. Like, what are these bears doing? They are just everywhere in Tall Trees. You can't go even one step in Tall Trees without getting attacked by a bear. You also have this little cabin that's also in the area around Aurora Basin, but there's not really a ton going on in this cabin in either Red Dead Redemption 1 or Red Dead Redemption 2. Just another abandoned place that is just for some reason abandoned. I don't know. I feel like this would be one of the few places that isn't abandoned, but it could just be the fact that it is winter during this time period that is the reason that it's abandoned. The next area I visited was in Nekati Rock. I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't really know how you pronounce it, but this is the highest point that you can go on the Red Dead Redemption map, which does make it a pretty cool spot to go visit. It's used in one mission with Jack Marston, where Jack Marston is kind of stuck up here and gets attacked by a bear. And it's also used when you kind of visit around Cochine, but there are some absolutely beautiful views from this area, and this place definitely deserves a like actual name because this area is pretty cool to go visit and just kind of feels like a cool old mountain that is like above everything else. The next place I visited was this mine that is right around Cochine. I don't know if this mine has any specific name because it's one not there in Red Dead Redemption 2, and this is also a place that I don't think you can visit without cheats in the actual game. Like, yes, you can visit it. There is a specific mission that is connected to this mine in Red Dead Redemption where you go and visit and you're trying to spy on Dutch in Cochine, and you do visit this location, but I don't think you can visit it in free roam. It is kind of a cool little location, but there's not a ton going on here. I mean, it is nice to visit the area that you can only visit in the actual mission here, but there's not a ton going on here. It's kind of just like an abandoned mine, and there's not like a lot of other things in this area. It's kind of just used as set dressing for that one mission. But the other thing is you can go and explore a lot of the other locations. Like this is the area where I believe the cougar attacks you, and you can also just climb up the area because it's all like set up for that one mission where you have like this climbing section. You climb all the way up to the top of the area, and this is the area where they have Dutch's lookout over here, and then this is where Dutch shoots you from this area. So it is pretty cool to kind of like explore it, but it just feels so like specific to that one mission. There isn't anything here that feels like a real world. It all feels so specific to that one mission. So it does feel like a little bit of a disappointment when you actually reach this area because there's not a ton going on here. And even when exploring around here, it doesn't really feel like a real place that real people live in. It feels like something that is specific to a video game. And then I eventually did fall all the way down to my death. I then visited Cochine, and you have this destroyed gate out front and just kind of like everything getting destroyed in this location. You have all this area, and then visiting the actual inside of Cochine. It is pretty cool that all this was built in a short time period because none of this is in Red Dead Redemption 2, so you can assume that all of this was built right in between the 4 years in between the two games. So I do kind of understand how it was all built in that time frame because most of the stuff here is wood. It's all kind of like temporary for the most part. You have a lot of these tents over here, and it also was built with a gang that was made out of a lot of Native Americans and only recently recently popped up in the area. That's how everyone knows Dutch runs the gang, because it only popped up recently, and Dutch is also like the leader of a bunch of Native Americans in this area. So it does make a lot of sense that it was only built in the last couple of years, and it is pretty cool to go visit it because you have like all these like different wooden pikes, and just the fact that they made a wooden fort in this short of a time period just does feel pretty cool. It's also in a very like enclosed area. It's super far up into the mountains. It's in this like little canyon that takes a long time to get up into. It kind of reminds me a lot of like Fort Mercer, where it's just pretty hard to get into and like fight into. So it makes sense to be like a criminal area, because it would be so hard to take out Dutch at his location without having like a huge fighting force. And they eventually do take them out just because they have more people, and they take them out in more normal battles before eventually doing the assault on the fort itself. And even visiting in this area, where you can see that this area is kind of destroyed. I mean, obviously John has already destroyed this area and already like burned down a lot of it, and that's why a lot of it is destroyed. But it just is a pretty cool place to go visit, because you don't really get to see this location for that long besides in that one mission, and you don't get to like slow down and actually enjoy it and like see how Rockstar actually designed this location, which does feel a little bit cool. It does seem a little bit impractical to have like a ladder on one side and then the ladder on the other side, where it's like you have to go out in the cold just to get up the next level. Just doesn't really seem all that practical. But this is the area that's actually connected up to the cave. I'm assuming this is where Dutch lives, because this is where you kind of confront him in that final mission. And it also seems like there is like some sort of an actual like cave here where someone is living. So I'd assume Dutch gets to live in this cool cave, because this cave seems so much better than some of the tents outside. Like, why would you want to live in a tent when you can live in this like nice insulated cave where you can have the fire in the middle? It's all super chill, and just like, look how big this is. Like, this is a place fit for a king, and at this point, Dutch is the king of this location. You also see the mirror there, and Dutch is a very vain person, so this definitely just seems like the place where Dutch would actually be living. Overall, I do think visiting this location like Coaching 8 is pretty cool, but there isn't a ton going on here to explore and see. Like, it is just kind of like, this is where Dutch lived. This is where Dutch had all of his minions live. There's not a ton else going on here in this location. You also do have the final place where you see Dutch in that mission, and you kind of like confront him at the very end, which is all the way up all these different ladders, which again, it just does seem a little bit impractical to go up all these different ladders just to get to this location. Like, what do we need this viewpoint for? Like, I just went up like 4 different ladders just to finally get to this last location. It probably is just there for the actual mission, but you can finally get to the final point where you confront Dutch here in a beautiful view. Leaving Coaching A and leaving the whole Tall Trees area in general, I finally went over to the Great Plains in Beecher's Hope. It is funny when like a ton of animals are just always in Beecher's Hope. Like, obviously animals are probably going to be in Beecher's Hope because there isn't really anything protecting them from the outside world, but it's always just funny to have like John going home and there's just a pack of wolves right in front of his house that he has to fight off before even getting home. It's like, you maybe could make this house a little bit, stopping some way of getting the elements out. But Beecher's Hope itself, I feel like, isn't really that interesting in Red Dead Redemption 1. Like, obviously it is your house, but it isn't even really your house for a long period of time. And even in like Undead Nightmare, it just really isn't your house. It's kind of this weird place that never really seems to be your actual home. And even for the time period that it is your home, like now in the game, this would be John's home. There isn't really that much going on. You're kind of forced into these missions that are like very linear and just kind of force you into mission after mission after mission, because you can't really do anything outside of the house besides these missions. Like, at least in Red Dead Redemption 2, there are like a couple of chores that you can do in the house. Like, that would be a really cool thing to add in Red Dead Redemption 1, where maybe you have to like herd stuff and like do things. But again, that's kind of like forced into the missions themselves, where you have to do things around the house and you have to be a father to everyone. But just when playing around in Beecher's Hope in Red Dead Redemption 1, you're forced into these missions. Like, look at all these X's here. These are all the mission starts. There are 3 different mission starts, and I had to cleverly avoid them when visiting this because I didn't want to start any of the missions. And it's pretty hard to do it because Abigail's mission is actually in the front of the house. So I had to finesse my way into the back of the house and instead visit through that way because I didn't want to trigger any of the missions. But inside the house itself, there isn't really a ton going on. You can see Abigail in the kitchen doing a work, making a good food, some good stew for everyone, but there's not a ton going on in the house itself, and I don't really think the house is all that interesting. It kind of is just a generic house. You got the bed, you got a bed for Jack, and you got a room for Uncle as well, but there's not a ton going on that is like interesting in Beecher's Hope, but it does make sense. They don't need to add content in your house. One of the other places I visited on the way to Blackwater, our final location, is Broken Tree. I don't really know what is so interesting about Broken Tree. It doesn't even really look all that broken. Like, I guess there is like a split right in the middle, and it just kind of looks weird, but it isn't really a broken tree. It's like a normal tree. It's just split into 4 different directions, but I guess that's why they call it broken. Not really that interesting of a location. And now we can go into Blackwater. So Blackwater is the final place in this video that we're going to be visiting in the United States of America. We're then going to be going to Mexico next, but there isn't a ton going on in Blackwater in Red Dead Redemption 1, at least out this far out. Like, there is the church, which is kind of cool. It's kind of cool to go visit. I do think the church is a little bit more unique than a lot of the other churches in Red Dead Redemption 1. I did forget to go inside of it, so maybe there's something cool inside, but I feel like going in the other churches, they all kind of looked the same inside, at least in America. In Mexico, they have a lot cooler churches. The rest of Blackwater, I don't think is all that interesting. You do kind of have like little suburbs outside of Blackwater, which I do think is cool, where you kind of have this like town center, and then you have these bigger houses that are kind of like more ranch focused around the rest of the town. You also have the railroad kind of going right through the middle of the town, separating the town center from all the other houses, which I do think is a cool geographical design. And then you have this like Blackwater city center part where you have the city hall, you have the police station, and you have the bank all in one location. This is one of the coolest locations in Red Dead Redemption 1. It just shows how much more powerful Blackwater is than any of the other cities in the entire game. Like, no other city is going to have as large of a display like this as Blackwater does, because you have this whole city center. You just have so many things going on here. Like, this is just like a show of your wealth and just a show of how powerful Blackwater is. You just have a whole park and city center just for no reason. They're just trying to show off their wealth and show off that they are more wealthy than some of the other towns here. And Blackwater really is more wealthy. I mean, look at how big their police department is. Like, no other city has a police department like this, and no other city has paved streets. Like, Blackwater is the only place in the entire game that has real paved streets, and it just shows Blackwater is this place of wealth, and it is this kind of like eastern city in the west. It's the start of like the place that is taming the west here. And you can just see that, like, you also have this area where you have a huge dock out here, and you have huge boats that can come in. And even this side, which is probably the least developed part of the actual Blackwater city center, the place where the butcher is, the tailor is, you have so many different businesses that are operating in Blackwater. It just shows the amount of wealth that comes with living in a town like Blackwater, where there's no other city that has a furniture store, a tax store. Like, all these different stores are just in Blackwater. You can kind of just live in Blackwater and do everything in Blackwater. And that's the reason why they have cities in real life. If you can have one place that you can do everything, it just makes a lot of things more easy. But then on this side, you kind of have like a lot of the other big houses, and then you have kind of like the shacks over here to the right. But the big houses, I don't really think are all that interesting. I mean, it's nice to have these large houses, and I think a lot of the rich people in this area would live in these large houses rather than like an apartment in the middle of town, because why would you want to live in an apartment when you can live in a huge house that's just like a little bit further away from town from everyone else, and you also want to stay away from the poors that live in the town instead. So it does make sense to have these, huge houses on the outside here. But then it's also like you have these like shacks in this little like shanty town right next to it. It just seems a little bit weird that you'd have these shacks right next to the big house as well, but maybe the people are willing to live next to the shacks as long as they get a huge house to live in. Passing by this western side of town, it's clear that this is the poorer side of town, just because you have like, all these shacks here, and it's also not fully developed in this side of town where a lot of these things, you have these empty plots of land, you have these shacks that are just kind of rickety and put up in weird ways where you have like sheet metal there, and then you also have like the blacksmith and the kind of like, I feel like more poor side of town here, like the blacksmith and the furniture. It doesn't seem like these are all the worst like buildings or like stores to be in, but they definitely don't seem as nice as some of the other ones that are closer to the center of town. Like you can clearly see that Rockstar did a pretty good job of like designing the town itself. You also do have this automobile place, which I guess is just in the poor side of town because it's probably a lot cheaper to get an automobile thing. It's also like, if you look at that in real life, like a lot of the automobile places are in not necessarily like the nicest parts of town, just because they need a lot of land to kind of take up. Same thing with the railway station. It's kind of in between the suburbs and the actual city center, which again makes a lot of sense. You don't want to give up a lot of valuable land to a railway station that doesn't really provide things to people. Like you want to keep it in a spot where it can still be used by a lot of people, but at the same time it's not taking up valuable space that could be used for like a store or something else that can only be in that spot, because a railroad station can kind of be anywhere and still be extremely valuable to the city. I then finally wanted to go down the main street of Blackwater. These are where the most valuable businesses in Blackwater are. This is where the hotel is. This is where you get kind of like the better general store. This is just where everyone in Blackwater is going, and you get these cafes, you get the brewery, or never mind, that says jewelry. Never mind, that was actually a big mistake there. You also get the theater on the right here. You get the newspaper offices. This is where the richest people in Blackwater are going to be, and just seems like the nicest street because this is the only paved street out of like the ones that are running horizontally. So this is definitely the nicest area, and it also connects all the way over to the actual city hall itself. This area is just super nice. You get the general store, you get all the nice buildings are all in this street. And then I found this guy who really wanted my help to catch a thief, and I'm like, why do I have to catch a thief in an area that actually has a police department? Like, could you not go over to the police department instead of asking me to catch the thief? And then the funny thing about it is that the thief is just running on the dock. Like, who are you running from? You can't escape from anyone by running on the dock. I easily take him out and then, take the money as well. But that's kind of the end of Blackwater. Blackwater is a really cool town, and there's just so much going on here. It really is the biggest city in all of Red Dead Redemption 1, but now we're heading over to Mexico. I started my journey into Mexico by starting in the very first place that John goes into Mexico, just like I did in the rest of the map, in the border crossing. I don't really know what a border crossing would be like in the 1900s, but I feel like there has to be some sort of like border agent here, or just someone going on. Like, are people just allowing people to go from Mexico into the United States or the other way around? Like, I feel like there would have to be at least like a border agent or two. Like, I do understand why Rockstar didn't want to put it in there, because in the game, always having to go through a border agent here would be a little bit weird, but I just don't understand why there wouldn't be anyone at least protecting here, or at least some guards where it's like, oh, if there's some bad guys who are trying to go into the United States, they're basically stalked by the United States government. But immediately as I get over the bridge, I see these guys getting attacked by wolves, which is kind of interesting to me. There are so many different random encounters that you can get in the game, and you have these like two different encounters where the guys are getting attacked by wolves and these other guys are attacking some bandits. So I did just need to save these guys for a little bit, and they did eventually take down the guy who was a bandit and trying to run away. After this, I then started to head into Chuparosa, which is basically the town right by the border here. I mean, as soon as you get into Mexico, you can essentially see Chuparosa here. And I'm assuming that's why Landon Ricketts eventually did move here, because it was just the town that's right by the border, and he was just trying to fix things in Mexico and just kind of help people out in Mexico. And since Chuparosa is right next to the border, and when he went to New Austin, he just went to the very first town that he found in Mexico. I eventually made it over to Chuparosa, and Chuparosa is a pretty interesting city because it is pretty realistic, although there are a couple things in the city that just don't really make that much sense. Like, when you get into the city, the first place you can find here is the bank here, and it does make sense to have a town of this size to have a bank. I mean, you look at like the towns in Red Dead Redemption 2, and a lot of them have banks like Rhodes, Valentine, and even the smaller ones, they all kind of have banks or things to kind of get the money going in society. Like Ansburg doesn't have a bank, but it does does have like a company thing where they're distributing a lot of the money. There's not really anything to do in the bank in Red Dead Redemption 1 because why would there be? I mean, it's kind of hard to just go into the bank and like actually have some sort of interaction. There's not even anything like that in Red Dead Redemption 2. So it is kind of an interesting area, but there's just not that much to do in the bank here. And then next to the bank, we have the Posada, which I believe is supposed to be lodging in Spanish. So this is basically where everyone's living in the town. And the one weird thing about this is that every single person in the town is essentially living in this building that you can't get inside of, or a couple of the other buildings. It just doesn't seem like there's any like actual houses that people live in the city, which does seem a little weird, but I guess with like a walled city like this, there only is so much land that you can live in, and a lot of people during this time period maybe are living in apartments. I think it's the same thing in Europe where it's like a lot of people live in these kind of walled cities and it's just apartments in there. So it does make sense. I just feel like it's a little weird that there's not any like housing outside the city for like maybe some of the poorer people to live in, or people that can't afford the apartments inside the city themselves. It just seems a little bit weird that like all the housing is in the city and all of it's basically in this one building, and there's a couple other pieces of housing just around the town. Moving over from the housing in area, the Posada right there, we right next to that have the train station. So this is where everything is coming in and out into Chuparosa, and this is probably the most valuable thing that Chuparosa has because Escalera is the only other major city in Mexico here. I mean, there are some other cities in Mexico, but these are really the two major cities in Mexico, and the fact that they have the ability to connect to a train station does just really put them a leg above Escalera because Escalera doesn't really have as much going on. And I mean, even as you look at Armadillo and Tumbleweed in Red Dead Redemption 1, it shows how valuable a train station is during this time period. And the interesting thing to me is that Escalera really is the hub for like the actual Mexican government during this time period. And the fact that they don't have any train just makes it a little bit harder for like the army to get around. I mean, you can see the army is in Chuparosa here. So the fact that they have a train just makes it a lot easier to get from one place to another and to fight off any insurgents in the area. It just feels like a very valuable thing to have. And then over here we have El Alcalde de Chuparosa, which is like the mayor's office or the town hall. I don't really know what it would necessarily translate to in English. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be the mayor, but I think this would be like the town hall of the town. It's just crazy how big this is compared to like the housing they have here. This is literally as big as the entire housing in Chuparosa, and it just shows the inequality between like the top people in the town and the bottom people. And the top people literally have a whole building that's as big as the housing for everyone else in the entire town. It's just absolutely insane. Shows how much inequality there is. And it's also funny, there's this fountain that's kind of all around Mexico that just has like the green stuff and algae going on and just does not seem like a running fountain, and it just is really sad. It shows how Mexico kind of is super run down. I mean, you can also see there's also all these broken tiles on the ground, and just seems like everything in Mexico is kind of like run down and was super nice maybe 20-30 years ago, but there hasn't really been that much investment because you have like the Civil War during this time period and kind of everyone fighting over the investments they have instead of trying to build for the future and make things a lot better for the people in the future. And then in the Alcalde itself, there's not really that much going on. I mean, downstairs there is a place where they're probably holding all the criminals. There aren't any criminals in the actual holding cells themselves, but it does make more sense that this is more of like a city hall type thing if there is a holding cell in here, where you can also have the prison in here before they get sent off to an actual jail, which I think is in that area by the slaughterhouse, which we'll be checking out later. That's where like the actual jail for Mexico is, but there are a lot of these holding cells in each of the respective cities themselves. Moving upstairs, there isn't that much going on here either. There's this one guy working, I guess maybe he's the mayor or someone who's working for the mayor here, and then you go into this other room where it seems like this woman is maybe the maid who works for the mayor. I guess this is probably like the mayor's room himself, or you know, whoever is kind of controlling the town here. This is like the mayor's office to the left here, and then you get a nice view over the rest of the town if you are the mayor. So it would be pretty nice to be the mayor here. You get so much better accommodations compared to anyone else in the town, so it would be kind of sick. And then you also get this cool little thing that goes up to the top where you probably get the best view out of them all, and this is like an extra room for the mayor. So you know, being the mayor is probably extremely cool in Chuparosa. I mean, you get this amazing view over the town, you get the highest building in the entire town, and you get basically 2 rooms all to yourself, which is way better than anyone else in the entire town. So honestly, it'd be a pretty sick job to be the mayor of Chuparosa because you just get kind of stacked with all the things you have. I then went over to the church, which is right next to the alcalde there, and the church is probably the most interesting thing in Mexico itself. Like, I really like the way that Rockstar kind of showed the religion that is really prevalent in Mexico and basically not prevalent at all in New Austin. You also have this picture of the saint here, and he is in basically every single one of the churches in the entire game, which is just so funny because they basically just copy and pasted that thing over and over again. But you do have this church here. I love the stained glass windows here. You also have another picture of that guy there to the right, another picture of, I'm assuming that's the Madonna there, but this is just absolutely beautiful. I mean, they really did a great job of making all the churches these just really insanely like beautiful places and really just remind me of the inside of a church. Like, of course they did a good job of like doing the inside of a church, but I really like the fact that there's kind of like a great vibe inside the church, and it really just reminds you of what an actual church looks like. And the fact that they didn't have any churches in Red Dead Redemption 2 just really makes me sad, but I do understand, like, in Mexico you definitely need the churches because a lot of people there are extremely religious, while in like the actual Red Dead Redemption part they probably didn't have as many churches because people in the Wild West weren't as religious as the people in Mexico will. And then right next to it you have this cantina, and this is where you kind of meet Landon Ricketts a lot, and this is kind of like the bar area of Chuparosa. And then going inside the cantina, you can see this is where a lot of the people in the town actually congregate. You have some of the working women here, and then you also have a lot of these like gunslinger type people who are just in there to drink and kind of socialize with other people. I also really like all the posters they have in the background, like the cigarillos and then the cerveza stuff. It just really shows the ambiance and how like Rockstar really did a good job of like putting all these things in to just make it feel like a real place where people live. You also have this other working woman here, and you have this blackjack over there. Also all these cool paintings, which are also really nice. But I also really love like the tequila there, where you have like an actual like painting on the wall of the tequila, promoting the tequila. It just shows that, you know, people are out here maybe, you know, printing an advertisement and wine on the wall because they have a tequila brand and they want to promote it to everyone there because they're in a bar and they're probably gonna be drinking tequila. And you also have the blackjack over here where these two guys are working on the blackjack table, and it seems like they're all kind of gunslinger type people, which does make a lot of sense. They're going out there making a little bit of money and immediately spending it on the blackjack. And then out here you kind of have a area where, you know, maybe they're serving a little bit of food to people outside and they're kind of just hanging out and congregating. Right next to the cantina you have the mercado, the market here, and the market's got to be one of the weirdest places, specifically because of this guy right here. This guy right here is the doctor, and he's selling doctor's bags and things of doctorly things right in a market where, you know, they're cutting up beef and they have meat out there just on the meat hooks. And he's doing it in a very weird way. Like, why would you have a doctor in the market here and like right next to like where people are cutting up literal animal carcasses? It just doesn't really seem all that sanitary to me, and I just don't really know if I'd want to trust a doctor who is working in the market right here. But right here, the market kind of takes up a lot of Chuparosa itself. It does seem like a lot of people work in the market, or at least are selling things in the market. Like you have this guy selling fish, but kind of a lot of people are just selling things of like vegetables and fruits and all these things and just normal things you'd see in a market during this time period. And then going up to here, you have this woman who comes up to me and says that, Mr. Marson, you're such a good person. I needed to seek you out because you're just such an amazing person. You have this amazing honor. And she just comes up to you and gives you a little bit of money. I didn't really know this was a thing here. I know there is that one thing at the end of the game where if you have like high enough honor and you reach like the perfect amount of honor, like someone will come up to you and give you something for that. But I didn't realize they would just give you money if you just walked around the map like this and just had a high honor. So maybe it is a nice thing to just have high honor and go around the map. But this market is just one of the weirdest places in the entire game. You just have so many like weird things going on. Like this guy is literally like blacksmithing right next to a guy who's like sharpening a sword right next to people who are selling food. I just don't really think this is all that sanitary, and I don't know if I'd want to like get my food from a place that is right next to the blacksmith and, you know, maybe who's polluting the area with like coal and all that stuff. It just doesn't really seem like a market where it's all that safe to like eat the food or even get anything else from. Because like, bro, I am not going to the doctor who's right next to the blacksmith here. But it does make sense because Chuparosa is kind of like a tight town, and it just is more like a representation of what a market would be. The market would probably be a lot bigger, and then the town would be a lot bigger. So it isn't really all that realistic. It's more like representing a huge town in a much smaller area than it would be in real life. But it is a pretty good representation. I really do like Chuparosa, and I think it is one of the more interesting cities that you can visit in Red Dead Redemption 1. Then I started to leave Chuparosa, and the interesting thing about Chuparosa is that the railroad kind of like winds its way up to Chuparosa and then down. Like all the places they built it, it's like super built off the ground, which I just think is a pretty interesting thing about this area, where they kind of had to go against the terrain to build the railroad all the way up to Chuparosa. And the weird thing about it is that there isn't actually any railroad connection to Escalera. So it's like, what's the reason there's no railroad connection to Escalera while there is one to Chuparosa, even though it seems like it was a pretty hard way to get all the way up to Chuparosa, because it's kind of on like a little bit of a mountain peak. One of the coolest things about Mexico in Red Dead Redemption 1 is the fact that there are just so many beautiful areas in Red Dead Redemption 1. Like, look at this arch here. It's one of the most beautiful things you can see in the entire game. It just feels so like different and unique compared to all the other things. It's just a cool rock formation, and there's so many different of these areas in Red Dead Redemption 1 in the Mexico area that just are extremely beautiful and just feel so different and alien from the rest of the landscape. Like, New Austin is cool, but there's not really anything like beautiful going on about New Austin, but Mexico kind of has that like Western feeling while also having a lot of these like beautiful rock formations that just make it feel so much more unique. Like, Mexico just has so much more of an amazing vibe going on in comparison to New Austin. So I really do just love exploring around this area, because there are just so many cool places to find, and you can kind of just be there and kind of just breathe and drink in the landscape and just find that area super cool. But I eventually ran upon this area going around the arch, and then a man told me that he needed my help. So I eventually stopped and looked around for him, where he eventually came up out of the dust here, and I guess he needed my help. So I went over to talk to him for a little bit, and he just immediately yanks me off the horse. So I had to give him a little bit of the business, just shoot him right in the head, because, bro, what are you doing attacking someone with a gun when you don't have a gun yourself? Like, at least you could just rob him in a normal way, but just attacking him and yanking him off the horse when he clearly has a weapon on his back just doesn't really seem like the greatest idea for me. But there is just this beautiful arch, and we're eventually going to come back to this area, but first we're going to be exploring the west area and then coming back to explore this eastern area, because the western area I do just feel like is a little bit less interesting than the eastern area. The first place I visited was Tesoro Azul, which is just a little bit east of the arch right there, and you immediately are forced into a gunfight where you have to help this guy out by killing all the people in this village here, which does feel a little bit bad because John had already burned down this village before, and now he has to go there and take out all the other people in the village as well. So you do feel a little bit bad about this, but there are just a bunch of criminals in this village. But eventually, after clearing out all the criminals, which was relatively easy. I mean, this one is a little bit weird because you do have a couple of these areas which just feel a little bit harder to shoot into and have these like weird kind of shooting ranges, but I eventually did get to just explore the village itself. But before exploring the village, you do actually have to go in here, and there's like one last kind of like cutscene, I guess, or like one last action that you have to do to like fully save the city, and that is stopping this guy and shooting this guy who's holding up a Mexican army guy. So you do have to shoot him and save the Mexican army guy. I did get a nice little achievement for that, which was nice, but I just don't really feel like there's that much going on with these. I mean, like Tesoro Azul is kind of cool. I do really like this area, and it kind of has like this full like run down area to it. It kind of feels like an area that's like half abandoned and half still lived in, which just makes it a really interesting place. There's not really any places like that in Red Dead Redemption 2, and I feel like this is kind of like a little bit cooler of a place because it kind of feels a lot like Tumbleweed in Red Dead Redemption 1, where it's like, again, it is an abandoned place, but because you have these buildings and facilities here, it's like people still are going to live here and still spend time in this area, which just does make it a little bit more interesting. But eventually you have to go outside and also take down all of these guys. Like, I don't know why there's still some stragglers. I don't know what side they're on, but it is just a really interesting place to be in. Like, you can visit Tesoro Azul and you can see there's like the church area right here, and then you have like all of these abandoned and broken down villages, and I guess people are like still living in here, or maybe it's just like a bandit camp at this point. But it is just very interesting to have this area that feels very abandoned when you actually visit it yourself, but actually has people inside of it, and people that are still living in these areas that are just destroyed by rubble because, you know, people aren't trying to leave their homes and they still want to live in their homes. And this is just such a sad thing about war, where people have their homes destroyed and they still want to live and be in those homes because that's the place where they grew up and that's the place where they've lived for their entire lives. And you just can't live in these places anymore because they're just absolutely and utterly destroyed, and there's just nothing left to live for here because the home that you used to live in is not there anymore. And that's just kind of the sad feeling that I get when I visit something like Tesoro Azul, because these people are just holding on to this place that isn't the place that they originally thought it was, and it is just a new place now that is completely destroyed and abandoned and is a place that they need to move away from to find a better life because there's nothing left to live for in this area. So a little bit northeast of this area, you can find this place called Punta Agurio. I don't really know how to pronounce that. I don't really know what the Spanish is for that, but you can find this little mine here, which has these two little ways to get up into it. And I immediately, as soon as I try to get into this mine here, I immediately get attacked by wolves. And this is probably the most annoying thing about going into Mexico. I probably got attacked by wolves at least like 5 to 6 times by these like packs of like 5 to 6 wolves. And it's just so annoying to just always get attacked by them and always have to shoot them down. But you know, maybe in Mexico you just get attacked by wolves if you're exploring. But there is this kind of cool mine area that isn't used in the entire game, so I don't really understand why there is a mine here. I guess it's just kind of like a set dressing, a cool thing that you can go and explore. And there are a couple of chests that you can loot in this area, but there's really just not that much going on. It's kind of just in this weird part of the map that no one really goes to, and just a place that you can find while exploring the map, which is pretty cool. There's just not really that much going on with it. It would have been nice to have a little bit more going on with it, but I do understand you can't make every single place super interesting. Continuing east from this location, you can find this kind of another cool rock formation here, which is this area that's kind of like carved into the side of the rock, which is called Sidewinder Gulch. And in Sidewinder Gulch, you have this, what I would assume is like an army camp here, which I don't know which side necessarily this is on, if this is the Mexican army or if these are the rebels. I would assume these are the rebels just because why would the Mexican army be in Sidewinder Gulch where there's not really that much going on? It really feels like a place where there's like a rebel encampment, but by this time they are fully abandoned. But it is just kind of cool to go exploring around the map and find these like random spots that the rebels were camped in and the rebels were like fighting out from. Sidewinder Gulch is also just a pretty interesting place because you have like, I guess it was probably like carved by water flows, and just shows that it's like a place where is the perfect place for rebels to be, because it's kind of hard to spot someone inside Sidewinder Gulch just because there are so many different little pathways and things that you can go exploring around inside Sidewinder Gulch. But it is a pretty cool area, and I do think the fact that there was at least some sort of settlement here by either the Mexican army or the rebels here just shows that it's a little bit more interesting of a place to go visit. But there's not really that much lore going on with it. It's really just a place you find in the game that just makes the game feel a little bit more alive and makes the world feel like a real place that people are living inside of, because they used to build this thing and then they fully left away from it after they had no more use of it. I also just really like exploring and going through these like carved through valleys that go between the rock here. It just really makes you kind of feel claustrophobic and like tightened in an area, and just like imagine if there are bandits on the side of these rocks that would just attack you in certain points. I feel like it would make this area even more interesting. But overall is just a pretty cool area to go between. Like Sidewinder Gulch is just a really unique place, and it just feels like a lot of the other places in Mexico where they have these like cool rock formations and just cool things going on that you can explore just because of the beauty of Mexico. So next up, we have the place where you originally get into Mexico in Red Dead Redemption 1. This is the place where while John and Seth are trying to get into Mexico, they eventually get this thing chopped off, and then they eventually land at this place, which is called Puerto Chuchillo, which is kind of a cool area. I mean, there's not really that much going on here, but it's kind of funny that there are like a couple of missions that are in this specific spot, and it's just the most bare bones area. And I think this is also technically like the first place where you can sleep in Mexico. You also do get a solid view into New Austin, which is kind of cool. I also really like the water reflections that you get in the water here. It just looks kind of interesting. I mean, John can't swim in it, so you can't really do much with it, but it is just kind of a funny place that this is like the very first place that you go into Mexico, because it is literally the most bare bones area of all time. You can't really do anything here, but you can technically sleep here, so at least it is cool in that aspect. But the fact that this is the very first place that you get into Mexico just does make it a kind of unique and interesting spot, an important spot in the actual game. Continuing even further east, you can eventually get all the way over to Escalera, which is really the major city in Mexico. Technically, this is like the capital in game. I mean, it's not like really the capital, like technically there's another capital, but it's like the capital in this province of Mexico, which does make it the most important city in the entire game. And the fact that it's still not connected to rail just is kind of a thing that is mind-boggling to me, because why would you have the most important city not connected to the railway? And then in this area in the front, you have like the Benvenidos Escalera, and this is basically like the market area. And really, the market here is pretty run down. It's just kind of crazy how run down all the places in Mexico are. I mean, it does make a lot of sense. Rockstar did a great job of like kind of showing that Mexico doesn't have a lot of investment coming in like New Austin. Like New Austin at least has a good amount of investment coming in. But immediately as I get into this area, I guess this is like the stables area, a woman comes up and says that she needs my help because she has been robbed by a thief. So because I am John Marston and I just want to be an amazing person, I needed to go up to this man and lasso him down. And I don't really understand why you'd ever rob someone and not just get away on a horse, because if you're going on foot, someone on a horse can just so easily catch up to you. So it just doesn't really seem like the greatest idea. And eventually I just lassoed this guy and had to hog tie him as well. So it really didn't seem like the hardest thing to go and get this guy. But just because I'm positive Honor John, I did have to save this woman and get her money back. I then went back to Escalera where I found the woman here, and I guess she's a shopkeeper in this area right here. She's maybe like the doctor's shopkeeper. I guess that's probably what she had and was running when this man robbed her. But I eventually let her do whatever she wanted with this man because, you know, I don't want to be the one passing judgment on people. If she wants to shoot this man, she can. If she doesn't, she can be just a good person and let him live and maybe just, you know, cut off his hand like in the 1500s they used to do to people who stole. I then went around and explored the mercado here. So this is the market, and, you know, right here you have the stables, but it's very similar to the mercado in Chuparosa. I just feel like it's a little bit more spread out. You have the initial stables here, which is where I walked in first when that lady came in and tried to tell me some things. And, you know, having the stables right next to your market, again, doesn't really seem like the smartest idea, especially if you have like meat and stuff. Like having horse poo right next to it really doesn't seem like the greatest idea, but, you know, to each their own. And then you also have the stagecoach guy as well. And then you have like the main marketplace, which I do think the main marketplace is a lot better looking than the one in Chuparosa here. I mean, the fact that they actually have like a little bit of shade over their head and they have like all these different stalls set up in like this main covered area just does make it a little bit more nice in comparison to the other ones. But it basically is the exact same thing. You have the same guy chopping up the fish here and like chopping up the meat, and then you have like all the other very similar things in this market as well. But it is kind of funny, you get this guy like actually chopping up these animals, which is just really nice. I feel like it's so interesting when you get to see these people like actually doing things and actually working. It just makes the world feel a lot more real. Again, they're not really doing that much because in the Rockstar games, they always try to make the things feel realistic, but yet not too realistic, where it's like if you're looking in this area and you're spending like a minute in here, you think it looks pretty realistic because these people are doing the things, but they're doing the same things over and over and over and over again, which is just more to like simulate a real world instead of being its own real world. And then you have this guy who's actually chopping up the fish here. The other guy was chopping up some regular meat. Overall, the market is pretty solid. There's just not that much going on here. It's just kind of very similar to the Chuparosa one, where just a lot of people selling a lot of different things. And then moving over to some of the housing in Escalera. I mean, this is the house that you can rent as John, and it's got to be one of the worst houses in the entire game. I mean, the fact that you get your own house is pretty nice, but there is literally a hole in the side of the roof, and no one wanted to patch it up. They just patched it up with some regular woodwork here. It just doesn't really make sense. It just shows how much in Mexico they just really can't fix anything up. All these things were built maybe 30 years ago, and now they're just fixing it up with wood and really have a lack of resources and a lack of building anything fully built at this time period. I mean, it seems like this housing area is kind of built during this time period, but it's all made out of wood and it feels very temporary. It's just so interesting when you visit these towns in Mexico. It just really shows how little investment there was into Mexico during this time period. It doesn't seem like Mexico has been able to complete anything of good use. I mean, all the cool things in Mexico, they all feel like they were built, 20, 30 years ago and haven't really had that many repairs since, because they're now kind of all worn down and run down and not really in the best of shape. It just really shows how Mexico hasn't had the same investment that maybe New Austin has, or even Blackwater, where Blackwater feels nice and new, and these cities could be as nice as Blackwater, but they just don't have the same investment that the Americans do in this area. Like, everyone's in these rundown shacks that are all wooden and built next to these mountains here, and you can't go inside of them, so you don't know what's actually inside any of these, but they just don't really look that nice to live in. Like, would you really want to live next to the side of a mountain where you have a wooden shack? I probably wouldn't. And the thing about Mexico specifically is that the only interesting in like up to date and refurbished places are the churches. And it totally makes sense where the churches seem like the most important places in the entire town. They look the best and they really just are in the best shape, even if these ones aren't in fully amazing shape. Like, the inside looks very good. It seems to be fully refurbished here, and there just is an amazing kind of vibe and aesthetic going on here. I mean, I love the stained glass windows, and you also have like Jesus on the cross here, and then all the kind of spammed out portraits of the saints and saints here. And you also have this pastor guy who actually is talking and I guess is giving a little bit of a speech here to everyone in here, which is just this one lady right here. So it does feel at least kind of realistic. The pastor is giving a little bit of a sermon to the one lady here, but there's just not that much going on in the church. It's not like you can get a full sermon. I mean, maybe there is like one time where they have everyone in the entire town gather, which I just don't feel like is possible during this game, but it is cool that they actually do have like a pastor coming in and giving a sermon. It just does show how like realistic it's supposed to be. I just do think the churches really feel like the most important parts of these towns in Mexico, and it shows how important religion is to some of these places. Escalera also has really cool geography because it is kind of built on this like mountain or like hill, and it kind of shows like at the top is all the rich people, and then going down you kind of have the poor people, and then to the side, like on one of the mountains, you have the even poorer people who are living in their houses there, and then the market is at the very bottom, which is where all the common people gather. And then here is like kind of the law area. The law area is kind of cool here. I feel like, at least in comparison to like the one in Chuparosa, I feel like the fact that you have this kind of like courtyard here to separate away from the criminals, and then you have, these little cells for the criminals, just does make it a little bit more interesting. This one also has a little bit bigger of a jail cell here, which does make sense, as like Escalera probably has more political prisoners, as it is the main place for the Mexican army during this time period. This is where you meet all the generals and all the bad guys like Allende and De Santa. They're all in this area. And then to the right of this area, you have like the saloon, and this is the area with the working girls, and then some of the other like hotel areas as well. And this does make a lot of sense. This is probably where the Mexican army is working, so this makes sense why they have the working girls in this area and the saloon as well here, because the army men are way more likely to be in the saloon than the normal people. Normal people are more likely to be maybe in the market, but the rich people, they have money to spend on the working girls, they have money to spend at the saloon, they have money to spend to get drunk. So it's going to be on a higher level away from the kind of common people, because you kind of just want the saloon to be with all the nicer people and all the more wealthy people, so then you can kind of self-select away from all these poor people who might make your saloon a little bit worse. But it does just kind of make sense that this is going to be a little bit higher, just so you can get a nice view over everything, and so you don't have to like kind of congregate with all these poor people who are probably not going to make the saloon as nice. But it's also interesting how the saloon, cantina, whatever you want to call it, is a level lower than like all the hotels here. So it's like maybe you do allow some of the more common people in this area, and also the richer people can also go down here and spend some time, but the hotel is only going to be for the even more wealthy people and for the people who aren't staying in town for their entire lives. They're just here for a little bit. And, all these other people can be in the cantina. You can also spend some time with them, but you can also just be away and be with the working girls and spend your money on that. If you are a rich Mexican soldier and someone who's like working in the army, you don't have to spend time with all the common people down in the cantina. You can instead just spend your time in the hotel by yourself. And then out here, you also have this like rundown little shack area that has, this kind of tent over all of it, where it seems like people are living. And then right next to it, you also have just someone living out in the actual outdoors, which shows that the people in Escalera are genuinely like living outdoors, and there isn't enough housing for everyone who wants to live in this area. So people are living and just living on the land, just setting up a tent and saying, okay, I'm going to live here. And the last place we're going to be visiting in Escalera is Colonel Allende's mansion, which we have already destroyed by this time, or, kicked him out of the mansion by this time. And this is also just a very interesting place to visit because look at how big this dude's mansion is. Like, comparing it to the alcalde in Chuparosa, this guy probably has like the entire size of the rest of the town just for his mansion himself. Like, it just shows the wealth inequality in Mexico is absolutely insane. And yes, while this area does have a little bit of damage on it, like it's not fully refurbished and it doesn't look like fully amazing, it does look so much better than any of the other places in the entire game. It's not like they had, people that couldn't clean up everything. It's like there's not damage on these things like there is in the rest of the town. It is pretty nice. And while there is, some wear and tear, of course, there's going to be wear and tear on anything like this, it looks so much better than any of the other places in the entire game. It just shows the wealth inequality and kind of everything is going to the people at the top. And again, that's kind of the same thing happening with Abraham Reyes, but I think the Mexican army really shows the most of it because they have these people living in extremely wealthy areas, and then the people are just living in absolutely squalor areas and they're living in absolute poverty. And I think the best example of how Rockstar shows this in game is when you actually go up close to Allende's mansion and you can see this fountain here. Like we see the fountain in Chuparosa, this one actually has water flowing out of it. This one doesn't have algae growing inside of it. And this one is actually blue. So clearly there is a lot more money put into Allende's mansion than there is to the general public because the general people in Chuparosa don't have a fountain with running water inside of it. Theirs has algae inside of it. So it just shows that Rockstar really has this like wealth inequality between the rich and the poor people in Mexico, and that probably is the main reason why the Mexican Civil War dropped off, because there is just such a major wealth inequality between the poorest and the richest people. And it's like, even on this side, like look at how much space is just used to have a thing just to entertain Allende. Like this is like, I don't know if it's a fighting ring or like a bullfighting thing. Either way though, there's so much space just used to have a thing to, entertain Allende. And it just shows the people in Mexico are just living in an extremely bad place. And even if Allende had just given a little bit of his money to the town, spent a little bit of his money investing into the rest of the town, it would have been a lot better off because, this is a lot of money spent on just this one area. And this is a place where, maybe other people could live. Maybe other people could hang out here. Maybe this could be a whole nother town square over here. And instead, it's just part of Colonel Allende's mansion. And no one else in the entire town can use it except for him because he's just an absolute terrible person. I then headed even further east where you get this beautiful view right here into the water, into, I believe that's the Sea of Coronado, but this area is pretty cool. And then I found this guy whose wagon had gotten stolen, and the thing was, he was in front of the wagon, so he could have just tried to stop this guy on the wagon, but it was really easy to just, shoot him in the head, give him a little bit of that dead eye, and then retrieve the wagon. But like, I don't understand why this random interaction has the guy running in front of the wagon. Like, I feel like you could have at least done something at that point, maybe try to jump on the wagon yourself or just do something instead of just standing there and trying to get John to help, which again, John does do it because he's just a great person and he just wants to help out the society. He's a top honor person and he's just trying to help everyone out in the world. So he eventually does return this wagon back to his owner like a good person. But like, I just don't understand why this guy couldn't have just tried to jump on the wagon himself or at least do something else. Like, he was literally in front of the wagon where the wagon was going. So he could have just tried to jump on it himself and try to steal it back. Continuing even further to the east, we eventually run upon No Salida, and No Salida essentially is the most eastern part of the entire map, and it has the same thing as Tesoro Azul, where you do have to fight all these rebels here and take them out so the Mexican army can eventually go in and take it over themselves. And this place isn't really all that interesting. It feels very similar to Tesoro Azul, except it's just like a little bit better off. It's kind of just like a normal village way out here in the east, and I did visit it when I tried to visit all the towns here. This is more like kind of a fishing town. It does seem like a town that makes a lot of sense for it to be against the army here, but it is so close to Escalera that I feel like the Mexican army would have had an easier time like immediately immediately going to them and taking it over, because it is just so close that the army could have just immediately gone over here and taken it over, especially as I feel like these people are pretty poor and don't really have like a lot going on in their village. Like this place just isn't that amazing of an area, and it's kind of just a regular old town that you can go and visit. There's just not that much going on here, and there's not really that much like going on with the town. It's just kind of like a fishing village on the easternmost part of the map that it seems like only survives from the fishing and is fighting against the Mexican army. Since I visited everything on the eastern side of the map, I then went over to the western side to now explore the western side of the map. So I started from that arch there and wanted to kind of explore everything else on this side. I think this side has more of like the natural beauty of Mexico. This really has like the really cool rock formations that are like in the middle of the exploration that you can do in this area, and just overall has a lot more things to kind of explore in this area. In the eastern side, it's kind of more like landscape, and there like are some cool things going on, but you can find some actual secrets on this side in the west side. And immediately as soon as I get to this place, I do get another wolf attack, because these things are just so often in Mexico. I don't understand why this happens so often and why the wolves attack me, but this one was the worst out of all of them because they actually killed my horse. So I had to fight them in an even worse way, and I was just throwing fire bottles at them because I didn't think they could actually take out your horse, which is just a really sad thing. And the funny thing about it is I accidentally skinned the horse, and this is one of the funniest things in Red Dead Redemption, where you can skin both dogs and horses, which just doesn't really make a lot of sense, because you know it's like one of those things that Rockstar had to take out in the recent games because they don't want you to skin horses and skin dogs, just because those are like things that are, you know, bad for society, where they don't want you to go into like a church and start a church shooting there. It's just like one of those things that is more like the PC culture that they have now, where they just don't want like the animals that are seen as pets to be skinned in game, which does make a lot of sense, but it is just kind of a funny thing that you can go and skin your horse here. But I did realize that I had to get another horse, so I tried to look around to see if there's any other thing where you can get a horse, because you can't actually just get a horse immediately. You can't just start whistling, because you don't have like an actual horse in game here. You just have the horse that comes on whistling. So I saw these guys with their horse over here, so I wondered if I could go over here and just steal the horse from them, and they were like hanging out, chilling by this fire, which I thought was pretty cool. I kind of like these random encounters where you just have things that feel like a true Western, because I feel like all the people in Red Dead Redemption 2, they all just get so mad at you whenever you visit the camp here, and these guys were actually pretty chill, and they actually allowed me to hang out at their camp for a little bit, and I was gonna steal their horses here, but I just felt a little bit bad taking from these people who had just graciously let me hang out at their camp and didn't just immediately get mad at me and start shooting. So I did eventually just start calling my horse, and one showed up instead. A little bit further down the way, I saw these two guys getting into a fight here, and I saw that one of them, I guess you're supposed to save, and the other guys are supposed to attack because they're shooting at this guy behind this carriage right here. So I started shooting at the other guys. I was throwing fire bottles at them, and I guess this probably wasn't the smartest idea, because the guy I was actually supposed to save did just get shot during that time period when I was throwing the fire bottles at them. So I didn't actually save him in the end, but I did at least feel like somewhat of a good Samaritan by kind of saving him and taking out the bandits there. In this area, I also found an abandoned house, or kind of like a destroyed house, where there's a little bit of a chest that you can find. I think there were a couple of these in this western area of Mexico, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing. It just shows in Mexico there just isn't a lot of investment here. Like a lot of these people have these houses that are torn down. Maybe they moved to the city, or maybe it just something else happened that they were forced to move out. But there are a lot of these abandoned houses in the more western part of Mexico. So I don't know if that's like a specific thing for Western Mexico kind of had less investment than Eastern Mexico, or if there's any specific reason why there are more of these houses in Western Mexico than Eastern Mexico. But there are a couple of these that we'll be finding later in the video, and it's just kind of an interesting thing to me. Like, why are there so many abandoned houses in Western Mexico? Is it just people are leaving to move to the city, or is there like a more permanent reason of why this happened? And then I saw this guy right here who had a prisoner wagon where the two horses died and both the prisoners escaped. So I had to go after the prisoners here, and this is when I was really in the fire bottle era, so I was just using the fire bottle all the time. But I eventually did see this guy, and I was like, what am I going to do to him? So I just shot at him from deep. I then went the other way to take out the other prisoner and just hit him in the head with a little shot, and then I got to go back to the lawman and get a little bit of a reward because I got to take out the prisoners and be a really good person that just shot the prisoners without talking to them. Maybe they escaped for a good reason. Maybe there was a good cause that this lawman had taken them out for, and maybe he was part of the Mexican army, is actually just a bad guy here. You never know. Either way, this guy started shooting at me as soon as I got close to him, so I guess he really didn't want my reward. I eventually just shot him instead, so either way, both the bad guys are gone. If the lawman was the bad guy, or if the prisoners were the bad guy, no matter what, they're dead. A little bit north of here, you can find a burned down house that actually is used in one mission. I think it's the one where Abraham Reyes has like, I don't know if it's like a woman here or necessarily what it is. Maybe it's like a family member, but he tells you to get the woman out of there because the Mexican army are going to take her out, and you have to take her on like a wagon, take her down to a port, and then she leaves the area. And then I guess they burn down the house after, which actually is a pretty cool like environmental thing where you can go visit the house after and just fully burned down by the Mexican army. But there's just not really that much going on. I do like the fact that there is some like environmental storytelling where these things do change as time goes on. I mean, Rockstar does a really good job of like having things that change over time where you visit them and they're different than when you visited the first time. So I thought this was a pretty cool thing to go visit, but there's not really that much going on with this little burned down house. And then while visiting this house, I had to see one of the weirdest random encounters where you can see this guy literally pissing. Like, I don't understand how you can see this in game. Of course, you're not seeing anything. If you get too close to him, he stops pissing. But why is there a random encounter in Red Dead Redemption 1 where this guy is just pissing and you can see him pissing? Like, that is one of the weirdest random encounters in the entire game. And it's just so funny that there's like a random encounter where the guy comes down from his horse, starts pissing, and you can just see him pissing. I don't know. I just thought that was a really funny random encounter that I saw in game. And then I continued to explore Mexico. And the one cool thing about this part of like West Mexico is that it's a lot more flat than the eastern part. So you can kind of see a lot of different things, and it makes it a lot easier to kind of see the cool rock formations. Like all the way in the distance here, you can see those cool rock formations. And then we finally get upon Las Hermanas, where this is the convent that a lot of the convents are staying in, or a lot of the sisters are staying in, and this is where Sister Calderon is in Red Dead Redemption 1, and where you can meet her when you do get full honor, I believe, is when you can meet Sister Calderon here. But there's also the railway line right through it, which is kind of weird. Like, why does Escalera not have a connection to the railway line and Las Hermanas does? Like, I guess Las Hermanas might just have been on the line itself, and then it was just easy enough to connect the line through it, and maybe it's like more flat in this area. But it just does seem a little bit weird that like a random convent here would have a connection to the train line and not like the biggest city in Nuevo Paraíso. And then Las Hermanas itself was actually a really interesting place to go visit. Like I said, Mexico is like really important for the Catholic religion here. A lot of people in Mexico in real life are Catholic, and like a lot of people in the game are also Catholic, or, you know, seen supporting Christianity here. And just so interesting to go into these places where religion is extremely important, especially in Mexico, where it's so much more important than the places in New Austin or in Blackwater. It's not like they have a church in Blackwater. There's kind of nothing going on there, but they have a full convent here. And this is a place that seems to be a little bit in better condition than some of the other places in game, although they do still have that green algae fountain. So it's not in the best of conditions, as clearly if they have an algae fountain, you're not in the most amazing conditions. And like some of the other things seem a little bit broken down, but there are a lot of people in the convent. It's like surprising how many different people are like working in the convent or just in the convent itself. This guy, I guess, wanted to give me a gift. But looking around Las Hermanas, it basically is a simulacrum of a smaller town. Like, you have everything that you'd have in a smaller town. You have these stables over here. Then you also have people who are working on like blacksmithing things, and then other things. Like, everything you need in a small town is going to be here in Las Hermanas, because they kind of need to be self-sufficient. Of course, they can get things in through the train station, but it's not like they have like enough people to just fully do everything themselves. So they have to get some things in, but clearly they have a lot of people here, so they kind of have to operate like a little town themselves. And they have all these different things. There's so many random like storage facilities out here, and then you have all the people kind of packed into one small area. That's the one weird thing about Las Hermanas. It feels like they have so much space, and yet all the sisters here are all like packed into certain areas. And then visiting around the convent itself, there's not really that much going on. It feels just weird having these super big rooms out here. Of course, you know, maybe these are just like altars and places to worship God, but it just does seem weird that they have so much space like dedicated to just nothing, and then you have like not that much room for the actual sisters themselves. But I do understand they want to be like they don't want to have a lot of material possessions, and like God is the main material possession that they have here. So it's like the most amount of space needs to be dedicated to God, and they have like a small amount of space for themselves. But there's so many different like altars and different, I don't know, religious symbols that they have here. I'm not really that up to date on like what a convent would be like inside, but there are just a lot of crosses everywhere in the convent, which does make sense. Of course, it is a convent, like they are worshiping the Lord here, but it just seems weird that they have like different areas for all like the altars, when it's like, why would they not just have like a couple different spots where they can kind of all congregate together instead of having like a bunch of different spots that they're all like worshiping separately? So this is what I wanted to do, and I wanted to visit their actual quarters here. So this is the actual quarters of the sisters, and this is where they all get to spend their time. I also wanted to look in the mirror to see if there's any realistic reflections. They did not have that going in 2011, but that is all good. I accidentally stole from this place, so eventually, you know, the police came after me. They're trying to take me down. The sheriff was trying to get me. I don't know how they saw me, because no one in this room could have seen me steal from this area, but it is just kind of interesting how small the areas that the sisters have themselves. Like they're kind of in rooms that seem to be used in other purposes. It's like they do have a lot of space that they could have just maybe separated themselves out to get their own rooms, but it's totally understandable that they're each in like multiple rooms with other people. And then I started to head into the church here, and the church is absolutely massive in Las Hermanas, and I just kind of wonder why there's so many different altars around Las Hermanas if they do have the big church itself. Like if anyone could tell me in the comments if there's any specific reason, or if it was more just Rockstar trying to do things. And then technically I got wanted here, so I was like, what is even going on? Was it just because that I stole from that area? And I guess it was, like that's what I would assume, but eventually I just did clear my bounty here because I didn't want to get attacked while I'm in Las Hermanas. But the church itself in Las Hermanas I feel like isn't as interesting as the ones in like Escalera or Chuparosa, just because those ones feel a little bit cooler. They have like the cool stained glass windows. These ones do have a couple of cool altars, but there's not really that much going on with them that makes them all that interesting of a place. But I feel like exploring around the rest of Las Hermanas is way cooler, because you have these like random statues that are in certain areas, and these kind of like creepy and eerie hallways where there's no light coming in from the actual windows. You can't go into the doors, and you just have like the sisters sitting around. I don't know, it's just kind of creepy to like walk into this area and there's no other light. It's just all like candlelight. It just kind of feels like weird and ominous when going and visiting around the Las Hermanas area. But I want to go back into the church because the church is kind of cool. There are like a lot of these little side doors that lead into other things, but they're not technically open. So like maybe some of them would be, you go to the top of the church, and you do have some of these cool altars as well. I mean, these are really the things that make this a lot more interesting than some of the other ones in the game, but I just wish it had some of the stained glass windows, because I feel like those are some of the coolest things about the churches in Red Dead Redemption 1, because the stained glass windows just feel so foreign to the places in the game, where it feels like super realistic, where you have all these colors, and the stained glass windows are like oranges and yellows that are just so bright and vibrant compared to anything else in the game. And there just really isn't anything that is like all that bright and vibrant in the actual game, so the stained glass windows just feel so out of place. Overall though, I feel like Las Hermanas is a pretty interesting place to visit. I feel like it's almost as interesting as some of the towns, and definitely more interesting than some of the like smaller towns like No Salida or Tesoro Azul. Like there is a lot going on in Las Hermanas that is pretty interesting, and you do get some solid views over the rest of Mexico here, so it is a pretty cool place to visit, but there's not enough going on to like really make it a place where you'd spend a lot of time. Like there's nothing else to do here besides kind of just look and check it out and see how close Rockstar got to like representing a convent here. So it is a pretty cool place to visit, but I just wish there was like maybe something else going on that would make this place a little bit more interesting. It just feels a little bit boring, but I understand like a convent isn't supposed to be the most interesting place. It's supposed to be about people devoting their life to Catholicism in this case. I then went over to Agave Viejo, and this is specifically the area where Abraham Reyes is camping out for like 1 or 2 missions. This is basically his like rebel camp that he started, and where all the rebels are kind of like coordinating from. So it's kind of an interesting area. It just feels like a nice like ranch area where, you know, a rich person lived. Maybe it is Reyes's ranch himself, but clearly he's the one controlling it at this point, and this is like the main rebel area. So it is somewhat self-sufficient. They do have like a little bit of a farm here. They do have a solid amount of stables as well, but there's not really that much going on in this area itself. It doesn't really feel like a rebel camp. It just feels like a rebel base that they have, maybe. Like maybe it's not the place where all the rebels are holed up, and maybe it's just like one of a couple safe houses that Reyes is in, just because there aren't really that many different rebels here, and this area doesn't really have that much going on. Like, yeah, there are like a couple horses here, there are people in the area, but it doesn't really seem like an area where a lot of people are working and a lot of people are like coordinating the effort. It just seems like a place where Reyes is just chilling because he kind of likes this area and he kind of likes to spend time here. Like, there's just not that much going on in this area. It's kind of a weird place just because, again, like, I understand they can't like fully simulate a civil war. It's like the same thing with Skyrim, where it's like they have a civil war in game and it just doesn't really feel like a civil war. And this one, it kind of doesn't feel like a civil war either, just because Escalera is pretty small, and like the area the rebels are coming from also feels pretty small. There's like 5 different tents here as like the whole rebel army, or like the main rebel force. But I do understand that this could just be where Reyes is, because he doesn't want to hide in like the main rebel area if they have like control over an entire city, because then if that city goes down, Reyes goes down, and he's basically the entire revolution himself, as he's basically the whole symbol of the revolution and the one that's kind of leading everything for the revolution. So if he goes down, then everyone goes down. I then headed north away from Agave Viejo, and this area has some beautiful rock formations. It's not as beautiful as the ones that we'll be seeing all the way out in western Mexico, but this area still has some like nice cliffs that really do just look beautiful to look at and kind of explore through this area. But there's not really that much going on in this area around Agave Viejo. After this, though, I did leave and go to Sepulcro. So Sepulcro is a kind of tomb or cemetery in this area just north of Las Hermanas, and I think this is the place where you get rid of DeSanta, and it's also used in Undead Nightmare as like a place where you have to take everyone out here. It is just a pretty interesting area. There's not that much going on with it, but I do think it's kind of just a unique area to go out and explore, and kind of just a creepy area if you don't visit it in the daytime. I mean, it's like an abandoned and kind of destroyed cemetery area, which just feels like weird and creepy. It's so interesting, like seeing the cemeteries in Mexico compared to the ones in New Austin. In New Austin, I feel like the cemeteries are at least like well maintained. Like Cooch Chapel is like kind of well maintained, and this one is kind of like a destroyed cemetery. Like, is no one coming out here and maintaining this? Like, it feels like a place where, you know, maybe some families are coming out, Dia de los Muertos, and they're coming out and just hanging up stuff on the guy's grave here. But it just seems weird that they just have fully destroyed it. And then this guy came up to me and, you know, he asked me to hang out, and then he pulls me off the horse. So I had to shoot him as well. I really just don't understand this interaction. Like, why do these guys always just think they can come up to a guy with a gun and just pull them off the horse and not have anything happen to them? And also in this area, there are a couple of other things here. There is like that burned down house right there, and there's also this wagon over here. I don't really necessarily know what either of these things were used for. Like, is this where a guy would maybe maintain the cemetery and they got burned down and that's why the cemetery isn't being maintained anymore? I don't really know. It's just kind of an interesting building to be here. If there's any specific reason for this building, I'd really be interested to know what it is. I guess it was probably just a guy that was maintaining it, or a guy that was like working on the cemetery. It had to be something involved with the cemetery, so it's likely someone that was just maintaining it. Next up, I went to the very southern part of the map. This area is basically jutting into the mountains of Mexico, and this is like the furthest place you can get in Mexico here. There's not that much going on, although there is like a military camp, I guess, over here. It's called Laguna Borrego. So I don't really know what's going on in this area and why there's necessarily like a military camp over here. It just seems kind of weird where you have like one camp. I guess this might not be a military camp. It might just be someone hanging out in this area. But this area is pretty interesting to explore because you have like these super wide valleys that just nothing is going on in this area. And it's kind of surprising to me. Like, I would kind of expect more things to be going on in this area, but instead it's just this like camp, and I guess that's like sort of ranch area because you have like this fence around this ranch here. Maybe there was a house that used to be here, or maybe they just kind of set this up after the fact, but it seems like whoever was living here has abandoned it by this time. Likely this is due to the Civil War. Maybe they were part of the army, maybe they weren't part of the army, but either way these people have likely abandoned it because of the Civil War, because living in an area all the way out here here. It's probably a lot harder when there's a civil war going on and people are fighting in your area. And then just this area around is just kind of weird. It kind of just feels like empty and desolate, which does make a lot of sense for the Western. I really just do think in Mexico, they killed the vibe so much because it just feels so empty and desolate, and you're like going out and actually like exploring places. And I just wish there was a little bit more interactivity to Red Dead Redemption 1. It would be so much better because then you could really live out the feeling of a Western here. But I do think they just did a great job of like making it feel empty and desolate, and everything you come upon is important. Rancho Polvo is another place that you can stumble upon, and this is another one of those abandoned buildings that I was kind of talking about a little bit earlier. This is like a very similar one that seems to have been abandoned relatively recently because there is some part of the frame still here, but it's just kind of interesting to me why these places were abandoned. I mean, this seems to be in a pretty solid area, but while this was happening, this guy was running away from this other guy. So, I did have to give this guy the business and just shoot him because, I always got to help out the good people, and this guy definitely needed to hunt this guy down for some reason, so I had to shoot him. But this is just a pretty interesting area. Like, I don't know what's going on here. It doesn't really seem like this is a good place for like ranching just because it's on the top of a hill here and you can't really get like a ton of animals up here. But it does seem like they have this furnace over here, so maybe it was like more of like a blacksmith's area. And also just looking at the house seems extremely small. Like, I don't know if you could fit like a whole family room and anything else in here. It really just feels like something with like maybe a bedroom and then you have an outhouse out here. It just seems like a very small area, but you do have some amazing views, so I do really understand why someone would want to live in this area. And then heading further into this area just seems so weird to me because it feels like something should be here. I also visited this in Red Dead Redemption 2 when I went out of bounds here, and it looks very similar to how it looks out of bounds in Red Dead Redemption 2, except, I mean, you actually have like the bushes and boulders here, but it's like all this stuff is also in Red Dead Redemption 2. It just feels so weird to have like nothing actually out here. Like, would there not be, I don't know, like a little house over here or something? I don't know. Maybe they wanted to put something out here, but they just didn't get enough time to. It just seems weird that you'd go all the way out here and there's just nothing to find or nothing to explore. Maybe I missed something, but I feel like I really didn't because there's just not much out here. And it does make sense that there's nothing out here, but like, I feel like in game, you'd probably want something out here to at least reward players for getting all the way out here and basically going to the farthest point in the entire game. And then continuing east from that area, you can finally get into the beautiful western part of Mexico. I guess this is technically the eastern part of Mexico. I don't know what I'm saying here. This is the eastern part of Mexico, and this place is absolutely beautiful. There are all these amazing rock formations here, and you can just really see so far from here. There isn't really that much going on in this area, which is probably the one thing that I would say isn't the greatest about this area. Like, there's not that much to do here, but it is just extremely beautiful and just kind of cool to explore around because there are just so many like cool things to see in this area. I then headed into El Matadero, which is the slaughterhouse area, and it's kind of a unique area. I feel like in terms of like towns, it's probably one of the more unique towns in the entire game because it is totally about a slaughterhouse. Like, this whole thing is a slaughterhouse. And you go into this room and you're like, what is it? And it's actually a smoker for the meat, I'm pretty sure, because there's a fireplace and then you have the meat on each of the sides, which I just think is a pretty cool touch. I mean, it just feels a lot more unique than the other towns because it's like all about the slaughterhouse in El Matadero. Like, everything is around the slaughterhouse, and even going around, you have the stables here. So this is probably for maybe the higher ranking like Mexican army officers or someone else, because I feel like the people working here are probably not going to be able to work in the stables. You can also see that above, it seems like this place is pretty run down as they have just random like metal sheeting on top and just doesn't really seem to be in the best of shape. And then even exploring around this area, it just doesn't seem to be in the best condition. And there are a lot of people in the town. And so it doesn't really seem like there's a ton of housing for everyone. I mean, you go into some of the buildings and you're just like, how are these people living in this amount of space? Because in here, there's not a single bed. Okay, there's one single bed in the corner there, and there's two beds here. So there's 3 beds in this building, and there's like 3 buildings in the entire town that are there for sleeping. I guess you also have that camp on the side there, but it just seems weird that you have so little room for housing in this area. I guess all the workers are working and they're sleeping in these tents out here, which does suck. I mean, this is where all the Chinese immigrants are, because this area specifically has a bunch of Chinese immigrants. There is a stranger mission where you need to give them opium, which is pretty funny as well. So I just think it's like a kind of a pretty unique place. You have a area that is filled with Chinese immigrants. It is a slaughterhouse, and that's basically the main business here. You can see the slaughterhouse to the left here, and there's basically just 2 houses to house all the people in the area, which doesn't really make a ton of sense when there's like 30 people in here, maybe even 40 people. And you know, some of them, they got to live in some nice areas. I mean, you have these Mexican army guys who are also in the area as well. Are they living in the same room as John? Because this is where John lives, and there's like 6 beds in here, or yeah, 5 beds in here. And it's like, okay, are the Mexican army guys sleeping in the same room as John? I don't know. It just seems kind of interesting to me. And then like visiting around this area, I guess this is where like maybe the pigs are kept or something. And then going into the slaughterhouse itself, the slaughterhouse is pretty interesting. Like inside you can see like all the pigs being hung up. And I don't really know where they keep all this meat. I guess it could be coming in by like train or carriage or something, but they do clearly chop it up. I mean, there clearly is a sense of chopping up all the animals here and actually like slaughtering them here. So it does really feel like a real slaughterhouse inside. I couldn't go up to this guy over there because that is the one that starts the stranger mission, but overall it's a pretty interesting place to go visit because it just feels so themed around this central thing of being a slaughterhouse and being a place where they have Chinese immigrants and all these other things that kind of come together to make a very unique town. And then right next to it, you have the prison here where you break Luisa out of this prison here. And this is actually a pretty interesting prison. It's kind of like carved in the walls here, which makes it a pretty unique spot as well. But I just don't understand, like going around this area, can people not just like escape out the top? Like maybe they have a ton of guards here to protect everyone, but it feels like there's someone that could like just escape out of the top. Maybe someone lowers down a rope into the prison cell and then they just escape out that way. It just seems weird that you'd have a whole thing that is just not covered on the top, like nothing covers the top and stops people from escaping out the top. It's just kind of a weird prison that you can just fully have the air open to anyone who's coming above them. Like I would assume there's some way to get on top of this and maybe a lower down a rope. I guess that would be pretty dangerous, but still, I feel like this isn't really the best spot for a prison, even though it is in a pretty cool spot. Because like if you were really trying to make a prison that was hard to escape from, you'd probably just like carve a little spot in the walls here and not allow anyone to come out the top. But just the areas that they actually do have the prison in are just completely open air, and it just doesn't really seem like the smartest idea to have an open air prison because someone can just escape out the top. I mean, I'm sure I could lower a rope down into the cell here because there's nothing stopping me from just lowering a rope down and just letting someone out that way. I guess maybe they just have a ton of guards, but it just seems weird that that would be fully open air. But I guess Rockstar didn't fully think that one through, even though this is a very cool place for a prison. I then continued heading east where this woman tries to talk to me and says that she needs help before an ambush comes and all these guys start attacking me. I mean, what are you guys doing? You guys can never attack John Marston. He's the best with the sauce. I mean, I did have to use Deadeye to take out all these guys, but you know, I did eventually take them all out, even though they did give me a little bit of a run for my money. But I eventually went up to this woman and she says that she was forced to do it. So I didn't want to take her out because, you know, I'm playing as top honor John Marston. I need to be a good person here. I need to let her live because maybe she was forced to do it. But, you know, I did get a little bit of honor there and a little bit of fame. So it's all good for John. Continuing over to this Eastern Valley area, this has got to be the most beautiful area in the entire game. I just feel like the beauty of this area is amazing, and it's probably the best place for all these like rock formations. They just look extremely cool, and they just kind of jut up from the area in this area. Like they just kind of jut up from the ground and look extremely beautiful. You can also see El Presidio, or not El Presidio, that is Torquemada over there, which also just looks amazing on the rock formation. I feel like this area just really shows how beautiful Mexico can be, but there's not really that much going on in this area besides Torquemada, which we'll get to. So visiting Torquemada. So Torquemada is actually a pretty interesting one because it is on the top of that hill there, or whatever you want to call it, rock formation there. So it is kind of hard to get up to. It's got to be honestly probably the best defended fort in the entire game. Like El Presidio is hard to get to, but Torquemada, you have to go all the way up and like round your way all the way over there. Like I don't really understand how it's so hard to get up to, and like why there isn't like, I don't know, like a little camp down here that would make it a little bit easier to defend instead of like having to go all the way up there and like having to get all your resources all the way up there. Because are they really surviving just off resources like that? And can they really be self-sufficient all the way up there? And then here is like the attack camp that you do with like Abraham Reyes. This is where all the guys start, and then you have to fight your way all the way up through all of these things, which did make it a pretty cool gunfight. Like I really do like the gunfight in the attack on Torquemada because it really just does have some good progression, and good progression in areas that also feel like realistic to the actual game. The one thing that is so weird to me is like, what are all these ruins for? Like I don't understand how you have ruins that go from all the way here all the way over to Torquemada. Like maybe these were houses, maybe this was like a whole village up here, which again does kind of make a little bit more sense why they would have something up here, but I just don't understand how the village just fully extends in all the places that it needs to be to like fully fit going all the way up to Torquemada. Like it just really is a little bit too convenient, and of course Rockstar put it here to make it a cool shooting session, but it is just funny because it's just not realistic at all to have all these houses here that are just fully destroyed, and they just conveniently go all the way over to Torquemada and to the fort. Like that just would not happen in real life. But it is kind of interesting. Like I do think it is cool to have like these like little ruins here. I'm just wondering like what took them out. Like how are all these houses so fully destroyed? And then you also have like this spot, which is like, why is there a spot in between that there's no houses, and then there's more ruins over there? Like who is not using this? Like maybe there's like a market over here or something, but it just seems weird to have like the ruins on the rock face too. Like it's on the mountain and it's like right next to the mountain, and then there's no like way to actually go through them. Either way, none of these ruins make sense at all. They're just put here to make it a cool fight, which does feel very understandable, but it just, you know, kind of makes me a little bit annoyed when I'm trying to look at like all the realism here, and this is just the most unrealistic way of like putting ruins here. Like how did these ruins get here? How are these ruins here and not all the way over to Torquemada? And they just don't really resemble a city. Like this is not how an actual city would be for Torquemada. And then it's also like, how did they all get destroyed, and why has none of them been rebuilt since then? And why is Torquemada just fully standing there while the rest of this town is destroyed? There are a lot of questions here, and a lot of them will not be resolved because they're not here for realism. And then Torquemada itself is kind of cool to go around and explore, but again, just how do they get the resources up here? Like, is someone just coming up, winding all the path and getting like food and stability to these guys? Because not like they have any food up here. I mean, maybe they have like flour and things of that sort, but I'm assuming these guys would be kind of pissed if they weren't able to eat any meat up here. I mean, they just seem like a bunch of Mexican army guys that are just kind of hanging out and chilling and not really doing that much and just kind of doing whatever they want because no one is going to come up and attack them, at least in the time frame that they are in now, where they've already taken over this fort. It just seems like kind of a weird spot to be in terms of the entire game. It just doesn't really feel that realistic at all. Like, of course it does make sense to have a fort up here, but like, how are they doing anything up here when it takes so long to get up here and just feels like it would take a long time to get resources all the way up here just for like a couple guys up here? Just seems like a very unrealistic place in game, but it does make it a lot cooler of a place because you do just get some of the most amazing views in this area. I then continued to head east and I saw El Presidio up here and finally caught up to the railroad as well, and I started to go to the railroad and I wanted to go back into New Austin because there is a border crossing over here as well that's just for the train. I think there's one mission that goes over here. I don't really remember which one it is, but it's the one where you go on the train itself and you're like shooting against the guys who are trying to attack the train, and that's honestly a pretty cool one as well. And I do really love the views on the left side here. You get this beautiful fall and just this area, I don't know, it seems kind of cool. It's like this cool like gorge area, and you can see like everything's like cut into the mountains. I just really like this area, and it really feels kind of unique compared to the rest of the game. I don't know, it just feels kind of like New Austin-y in Mexico, and it's kind of like a mix between the New Austin like swamp area and the Mexican Red Rock area. So I just think it's a kind of a unique area, but I just wish there was just something going on in this area. There's just not a lot going on in a lot of the places in Mexico, and I just feel like it could be a little bit nicer if there was just something going on. It's just so interesting to me, like playing through Red Dead Redemption 1 and Red Dead Redemption 2 and just seeing the places in Red Dead Redemption 2 that just fully have nothing going on there, and that's like Amberino and New Austin, and going there in Red Dead Redemption 1, and it's pretty similar in Red Dead Redemption 1 where it's like Mexico just doesn't really have that much going on here. New Austin is a lot more packed with content, and this area around here in Mexico, there's just like nothing to do here. It's just kind of like cool set dressing, and does make it a lot more unique of an area where there's not that much going on here. It really just fits the Western vibe. But eventually we got all the way over to the border crossing, which is where you can go back into New Austin. But because there's more things to explore in Mexico, I then headed back. I then visited the falls. I went right by the falls to get a nice close view to them. And I mean, this area, you can see the falls look pretty good here, but there actually is at least a little bit of a reward if you do go up to the falls. Like, I wish there was just a chest in some of the other areas where it's like, oh, you at least get a little bit of a reward if you do explore this area, because you do get a little bit of a chest that you can unlock and get in this area, and you get a nice cool view of the falls, like being right next to it where you get to see the water gushing down. There's not really that much of a reward. You get $18, but it's still kind of cool to get. And then right over here you can get the spot where Seth tries to get you across into Mexico. In that first time we were trying to get over to Mexico, this is where they cut the thing, and then you kind of drift down and then eventually get into Mexico. Further down the river, you can also get a beautiful view of El Presidio here. This area just is pretty interesting to me. Again, it just feels like New Austin in Mexico, where you have like this New Austin area here, and then you have like the Mexican rock formations on the side here. You have like El Presidio, that also feels kind of Mexican-y here with the fort, because there's not really that many forts. Like Fort Mercer is in New Austin, but it just doesn't really feel the same here. And then finally we head over to Casa Madruga, which is probably my favorite town in the entire game. It's not really a town, it's kind of just like a trading stop here, but it has to have one of the more cool vibes in the entire game. You kind of have it surrounded by all these mountains here, and it just feels more like Wild Western-y, and like feels a lot more like it's in a Western, and it's like one of the Mexican places that you go, because I feel like all the Mexican places in Westerns are always like this, where it's like either a really small town where you're going into it, or it's like a place where there's like a lot of like drugs and crime going on. And I feel like Casa Madruga really feels like a place where there's like crime and criminals going on, but it's kind of like a chill place to hang out for a little bit. But personally, I think Casa Madruga is my favorite place in the entire game, just because you have this kind of cool style here, like the Adobe style building over here, and then you also have the amazing rock formations on the other side. And then my favorite game in the entire game is played in here, which is Liar's Dice. Liar's Dice easily has to be the best game in the entire game, or the best like mini game, because it just feels so unique and so different from the other games. Like, yeah, you can play blackjack in real life, you can play poker, you can do all these other things, but Liar's Dice is just something that kind of feels unique to the game. And then going around Casa Madruga, there's really not that much going on. It just kind of feels like a smaller trading post kind of town, a place where maybe people are stopping by for a couple of days, because it is on the train station here. So maybe if you're going from like New Austin into Mexico into Chuparosa, maybe you spend a day or two in Casa Madruga just to hang out for a little bit. It just feels more of like a hotel style thing than like an actual place where people are fully living. It's kind of just like a traveling post and a stopover area when heading into Mexico. And then going into the saloon, I got one of the craziest scenes I've ever seen in Red Dead Redemption, where you have the pastor and the working girl right next to each other. One guy is giving a sermon and the other guy is trying to sell her services. Just an absolute crazy sight next to each other. I mean, they are the exact opposites of what they do for a living. One person is selling their body and the other person is probably telling her not to sell her body. But then going inside, this is just a place of like crime and gambling. You got the one gambling table here, and then you also have Liar's Dice as well. It just feels like a place where maybe the Mexican government guys go, spend a little bit of time, get a little bit drunk, and then just gamble their lives away. So it seems like a pretty cool area to hang out for at least a short amount of time. And I just think the vibes here are absolutely amazing. And of course, the thing that happens as I start leaving Casa Madruga is this guy challenges me to a duel because he thinks he can beat the John Marston, the famous John Marston, who's got Deadeye maxed out. And I just don't understand why anyone would duel John Marston, because in this, like, John Marston is actually famous. You don't really have the fame meter in Red Dead Redemption 2, but like, why would you challenge and think you can take out John Marston when he's beat so many other people in duels? I guess you want to take out the guy who is really good in a duel, but you know, I eventually did just shoot this guy in the hand because, you know, I needed to, and I didn't want to actually shoot him because I'm positive honor John Marston. I just want to save people's lives. I don't want to hurt anyone. So I did eventually save him. And the very last place I visited was El Presidio, which is the fort right next to New Austin here. And this is the one that kind of like looks over New Austin. And it's a pretty cool fort to explore. I mean, there's not that much going on in El Presidio, especially after you've already destroyed it and stopped it from being taken over by the Mexico army, or like at least kicked out the Mexican army from here and replaced it with the Reyes's rebels. So this is, I don't know, just kind of a normal area now. I guess there is like some women and children here that have moved into it, but it mainly is like a Mexican army outpost and stop where they're kind of fighting against everyone else here. I do think the thing about El Presidio, at least compared to Torquemada, is like it feels a lot easier to get supplies and resources up here. It also just feels like more of an actual fort. Like Torquemada is more of like an outpost on the top of a hill just because it's in a perfect position where you can kind of see over the entire valley. This one is also in a very good spot, but it feels more like an actual fort where there's actually like things going on instead of just a place where they just put it up there because it has a good view over the rest of the valley. And here you get some great views over the entire map. This area is just absolutely beautiful, and this was a super fun video to make. It was cool to explore the entire map here. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos like this where I explore the entire map of video games just like this one, and there should be some amazing videos popping up right now, so click on that.